Emergency alert. This is a message from the Vailshire Surveillance Bureau. The Collector has begun his hunt. Every mask in town is waking up. If you hear whispering behind your reflection, do not turn around. The faces you see may no longer belong to the living. Stay inside. Lock the mirrors. And whatever you do, don't take off your mask.
The low hum of murmured conversations and the clink of glass filled the cramped tavern, a place where secrets were the currency and suspicion the ever-present shadow. I found myself perched on a rough wooden stool at the far end of the bar, the dim glow of gas lamps casting jagged shadows across the faces of patrons hidden behind their ornate masks. Thomas Grieve, the bartender, wiped a glass with slow, deliberate strokes before leaning in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They were talking, Alara. The kind of talk that slips past the usual noise. You know what I mean? I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over me like a thick fog. The rumors had been swirling since the night of the murder, venomous whispers threading through the carnival town like a poison. They said I was involved, that my presence at the scene wasn't mere coincidence. Thomas's eyes, steady and unflinching, scanned the room before he continued. Vailshire's not used to outsiders poking around, especially not when blood's been spilled. People are scared, angry. They want someone to blame, and you're the easiest target. I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat a sharp reminder of my isolation. Trust was a fragile thing here, shattered, misplaced, or hidden beneath layers of performance and pretense. Thomas's quiet support was a lifeline, but even he was cautious, his words measured as if afraid to disrupt the delicate balance of fear and secrecy. Later, I found myself standing in the doorway of Mara Finch's antique shop, the bell's soft chime a brittle sound against the heavy air. The scent of aged wood, faded velvet, and dust hung around us like a shroud. Mara's delicate feathered mask caught the light, shadows dancing across her sharp features as she motioned me inside. You need to be careful, Alara, she said, her voice low and urgent. This town is a web of lies and half-truths, but it's more dangerous than you realize. There are forces at work beneath the mask's forces that won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens them. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I had known Vailshire held secrets, but the depths Mara hinted at were darker than I'd imagined. The weight of her warning pressed down on me, mingling with the gnawing paranoia that had taken root since the murder. Who can I trust? I asked, the question bitter on my tongue. Mara's eyes flickered with something like pain. Trust is a luxury in Vailshire. Keep your wits about you, and watch your back. Outside, the carnival's festive veneer seemed to flicker and fade beneath the night's cold grip. Shadows stretched long and unmoving as I walked the quiet streets, catching glimpses of masked figures slipping into alleyways, exchanging furtive glances that spoke of alliances and betrayals I could not yet unravel. At my lodgings, I sat before the cracked mirror, the dim light casting fractured reflections of a woman caught between the mask she wore and the truth she sought. The whispers of suspicion echoed in my mind, a relentless tide threatening to drown me in doubt. Yet beneath the anxiety a stubborn flame burned bright, the determination to unmask the killer and clear my name. The path ahead was fraught with danger and deception, but retreat was no longer an option. Vailshire's masks might hide faces, but they couldn't conceal the truth forever. And I was ready to tear through every layer to find it. As the night deepened, so did the shadows around me, and I knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new whispers, and perhaps the first real cracks in the carnival's glittering facade. The cafe was nearly empty when I finally slipped inside, the late hour lending the place a hush that contrasted sharply with the carnival chaos outside. Vailshire's streets were alive with masked revelers, their laughter echoing off cobblestones, but here, in the dim glow of amber lamps, I unmasked myself in more ways than one. Sliding the delicate porcelain mask from my face, I caught the faintest tremor in my hands. The weight of the day's discoveries and suspicions had settled deep in my bones. I stared into the chipped coffee cup before me, watching the dark liquid ripple as I set it down, the quiet almost a balm and a burden all at once. Vailshire was a town where truth was as elusive as the faces beneath the masks. The culture of performance was not merely tradition, it was survival. Every smile was a calculated act, every glance a secret message. I thought about Victor Langley, his silver Venetian mask gleaming like a beacon of power and control. He was the perfect embodiment of the town's paradox, charismatic yet menacing, dazzling yet cold. Watching him maneuver through the crowd earlier had given me a shiver I couldn't shake. He wasn't just hiding behind his mask, he was wielding it. My reflection in the cafe window caught my eye, dark hair pulled back tightly, eyes sharp but wary. Had I become just another mask wearer, hiding fears and vanity beneath a facade of determination? The thought was unsettling. I had come here to uncover truth, to strip away illusions. Yet the lines between performance and reality blurred every time I looked deeper, threatening to swallow me whole. Later, seeking refuge and counsel, I found myself in Mara Finch's antique shop. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and faded memories, carnival memorabilia lining every shelf. Mara's feathered mask caught the candlelight, her sharp features tense as she spoke in hushed tones. "Trust is the rarest commodity here," she warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "Vailshire's masks protect more than faces, they shield secrets that could destroy us all. Be careful who you let close." Her words settled over me like a warning and a challenge. Could I afford to mistrust everyone? Could I afford to trust no one? The night deepened, and so did the complexity of my thoughts. The town's culture wasn't just a backdrop to the murder, it was the very fabric of its mystery. Even Detective Jonas Harker, with his rugged face and plain clothes, was a puzzle. Our late-night conversation outside the town hall was filled with quiet tension. His skepticism about the town's customs clashed with my growing acceptance of their necessity. "You think you can know what's real here," he said, voice low and steady. "But sometimes the masks aren't just for hiding, they're for protecting." Was I ready to see what lay beneath? Or was I too entangled in the performance to ever truly unmask the truth? The answers felt just out of reach, like the shifting shadows cast by the carnival lights. But one thing was clear: I couldn't stop now. Not when the lines between victim, suspect, and killer were drawn so finely on the faces of Vailshire's masked players. And not when my own reflection was the most uncertain mask of all. As I stepped back into the night, the carnival lights flickered like ghosts, and I knew the game was far from over. Behind every mask was a story waiting to be told and a truth waiting to be torn free. And I was determined to be the one to unmask it, no matter the cost. The carnival town of Vailshire had a way of weaving illusions so tightly that the line between reality and performance blurred until they became indistinguishable. Tonight, beneath the kaleidoscopic glow of lanterns and the muffled rhythms of masked revelers, I found myself caught in a different kind of masquerade, one of the heart. I hadn't intended to get close to Detective Jonas Harker. Our interactions, so far, had been a delicate dance of suspicion and reluctant cooperation, each measuring the other as much as the truth. Yet tonight, in the shadowed folds of Vailshire's labyrinthine streets, something shifted. The evening had been charged with an undercurrent of unease. The second masked event was days away, and every whisper, every furtive glance, seemed laden with meaning. I had been chasing leads, threading through the crowd like a shadow, when I found myself sidetracked by a sudden impulse to seek out Jonas. Maybe it was the exhausting cloak of isolation I wore as the prime suspect, or perhaps the flicker of something more human beneath his guarded exterior. I spotted him leaning against a weathered brick wall in a narrow alley, his usual composure softened by the dim light and the quiet around us. His silver-gray eyes caught mine, a flicker of surprise, then something more tentative. We stood in silence, the carnival's distant cacophony folding around us like a protective cocoon. "You re-chasing ghosts?" Jonas said softly, breaking the silence. "But sometimes the ghosts chase you back." His words hung between us, heavy with meaning I wasn't ready to decipher. I wanted to ask him if he believed in my innocence, but the question caught in my throat. Instead I nodded, letting the silence stretch. For a moment, the masks we wore, both literal and figurative, dropped. I saw the man behind the detective's badge, someone as wary and wary as I was, trapped in Valeshire's web of secrecy. Our conversation was brief, but it sparked something fragile and dangerous, a connection that defied the ever-present suspicion. As I left the alley, the weight of my investigation pressed down harder than before, now tangled with the unpredictable pull of this new, precarious bond. The next day, Mara Finch's antique shop became my refuge. Surrounded by relics of a carnival long past, I wrestled with the storm inside me. The town's masks weren't just facades for the townsfolk, they had become shields for my own vulnerabilities. Jonas's face haunted my thoughts. What if this connection was a weakness I couldn't afford? Could I trust him? Or was I simply another mask in his collection of suspects? That evening, during a bustling masked event, our eyes met across the glittering crowd. The world around us blurred, the music, the laughter, the swirl of colorful gowns and intricate masks, and in that moment, everything felt charged with unspoken promises and perilous risks. Later, in a secluded garden, his voice dropped to a whisper, confessions spilling out between the rustle of leaves and the cool night air. "I don't know who to trust anymore," he said, his mask slipping in the shadows. "But I want to trust you." I felt my defenses falter, the barrier I had so carefully constructed beginning to crumble. Yet beneath the warmth of his words lay the ever-present dread, the knowledge that in Valeshire, trust was a currency as dangerous as the secrets we sought to uncover. As I walked away that night, the carnival's lights dimming behind me, I realized that this secret romance was not just a fleeting distraction. It was a double-edged mask, one that could either shield me or shatter everything I was fighting to protect. And so, with the weight of my own heart pressing against the relentless pursuit of truth, I stepped deeper into the shadows, knowing that the next move could change everything for better or for worse. The dance of masks was far from over, and now the stakes were more personal than ever. The fluorescent light above the interrogation room flickered weakly, casting a pallid glow over the cold metal table where I sat, fingers clasped tightly. Detective Jonas Harker's eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on me like a hawk's. The room was suffocating, the air thick with the unspoken accusation hanging between us. His voice was low but firm, each question like a chisel striking at the fragile walls I'd built around myself since arriving in Valeshire. "You were near the scene when it happened," he said, "and your presence raises more questions than answers." I forced myself to meet his gaze, refusing to show the tremor of unease inside. "I'm here to report the truth, detective. If I'm to be suspected, then the truth will be buried under lies." He leaned forward, the shadows beneath his eyes deepening. "Truth is a luxury in this town, Miles. And right now, you're the most convenient scapegoat." The weight of his words pressed down on me. Outside, the carnival town of Valeshire seemed to close in tighter. The masks people wore now twisted symbols of judgment rather than celebration. Later that evening, I found myself at Thomas Greaves' tavern, the dim light flickering over stained wood and murmuring patrons. His eyes caught mine from behind the bar, sharp and knowing. "They rewatching, Elara?" he murmured, sliding a glass of something dark and bitter toward me. "Not just the cops, but the whole damn town." I nodded, the unease curling in my stomach like a living thing. Rumors had spread like wildfire since the murder, each whisper another brick in a wall isolating me from the community. The jovial mask of Valeshire's carnival had shattered, revealing a crowd eager to point fingers. Seeking refuge, I slipped into Mara Finch's antique shop the next day. The air smelled of aged wood and forgotten memories, carnival relics casting long shadows in the muted light. Mara's eyes, sharp beneath her feathered mask, met mine with a mixture of sympathy and caution. "They don't just suspect you," she warned softly. "They want you gone." Her words were a grim reminder of the stakes. In Vailshire, trust was a currency more scarce than gold, and I was bankrupt. The nights grew colder, the streets deserted as I wandered beneath the canopy of carnival lights, now dimmed to a ghostly glow. Each footstep echoed, a lonely rhythm in the silence. The masks stared down from every corner, silent witnesses to my growing paranoia. Who could I trust when even my own reflection seemed a stranger? Yet, despite the mounting pressure, I clung to resolve. The truth was a thread weaving through the tangled web of deceit and vanity, and I was determined to follow it to the end, no matter what faces I had to unmask or fears I had to confront. As Detective Harker's investigation tightened its grip, I knew the game had changed. Vailshire was no longer just a town of hidden faces. It was a labyrinth where every step could be a trap, and I was running out of places to hide. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. The masks might have multiplied the shadows, but shadows could be pierced by light. I just had to find the switch, and I would. The question was at what cost? The carnival lights outside flickered through the thin curtains of my hotel room, casting elongated shadows that danced like restless spirits on the faded wallpaper. The muted hum of distant laughter and the faint strains of a calliope wove through the night, a haunting soundtrack to my solitude. I sat rigidly on the edge of the creaky bed, fingers trembling slightly as I held a photograph edges dog-eared. Colors faded, a relic from a life that seemed both distant and unyieldingly present. The image was of a chaotic newsroom, crowded with murmurs and hurried footsteps, the kind of place where stories were born in the crucible of deadlines and ambition. But this picture wasn't about triumph, it was about failure. About a story I had poured myself into, only to watch it unravel spectacularly, like a mask slipping and revealing the raw, flawed reality beneath. The memories came unbidden, vivid and merciless. The newsroom, bright and sterile under fluorescent lights, smelled of stale coffee and ink. I remembered the crackling tension as I faced my editor, his face a mixture of disappointment and frustration. "Elara," he'd said, voice tight, "you rushed into this. The facts weren't solid. You put us all at risk." I had argued, fought for the truth I believed in, my voice rising despite the knot tightening in my chest. But when the story collapsed, so did a piece of me. The public humiliation, the whispered doubts from colleagues, the gnawing self-reproach, they wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud. It was the moment I learned how fragile the line was between performance and reality, how easily vanity and fear could distort the truth. That failure haunted me still, a ghost lurking beneath the surface of my every step in Vailshire. The next day I met Evelyn Crest in a small, tucked-away cafe near the edge of town. The air was thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans and old paper. Evelyn was as poised and composed as ever, her presence a balm to my frayed nerves. "You carry a heavy weight," she said softly, her eyes reflecting both empathy and an unyielding strength. "But remember, Elara, the truth isn't always neat or easy. Sometimes you have to face the shadows within before you can shine a light on the world around you." Her words lingered with me, a reminder that the masks we wore, whether ornate Venetian disguises or carefully constructed facades of confidence, were shields against vulnerability. Yet, to find truth in Vailshire, I needed to confront not only the town's secrets but my own. Later, wandering the carnival grounds alone, I found myself before a mirror mounted on a warped, gilded frame. Its surface was etched with delicate patterns, bending and fracturing my reflection into fragmented shards. The face staring back was both familiar and strange, my dark hair pulled back, eyes sharp yet shadowed with doubt, a mask of my own making. In that distorted image, I saw the duality of identity that Vailshire embodied. The masks here weren't just physical, they were metaphors for the fears and vanities that kept us imprisoned in roles we barely recognized. And now, more than ever, I understood that to survive this place, I had to unmask myself, piece by fragile piece. The past had intruded, uninvited but necessary, stirring the embers of anxiety and reflection deep within me. The path ahead was murky, fraught with danger and deception. But beneath the swirling carnival mist, a quiet resolve began to take root. I would not let the shadows of my failures define me. I would seek the truth, no matter the cost. As the night deepened, the distant echo of carnival music intertwined with the pounding of my heart. Veilshire's masks awaited me, but so did the unvarnished face of my own courage. And with that, I stepped back into the swirling dance of secrets and lies, ready to confront the darkness both around me and within. The air inside the mansion was thick with the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume, a heady combination that seemed to cling to the heavy drapes and gilded furniture. I stepped cautiously into the dimly lit parlor, my footsteps muffled against the thick Persian rug that stretched beneath the feet of Veilshire's most powerful. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the room, giving their ornate masks a life of their own, twisting and warping their features into grotesque caricatures. I could feel their eyes on me hidden, yet piercing behind delicate filigree and feathers. The elite of Veilshire were a formidable breed, masters of concealment both literal and figurative. They moved through this masquerade with practiced ease, each mask a shield and a weapon, each glance laden with unspoken threats and veiled alliances. Before I had even crossed the threshold, Mara's warning echoed in my mind. Her voice, low and urgent, had barely risen above the din of her antique shop's creaking floorboards. Trust is a currency no one here spends freely, Alara. The masks they wear are more than decoration, their armor, for the secrets they kill to protect. Her words clung to me as I navigated the room, the delicate feathered mask she favored barely concealing the sharp lines of her face and the wariness in her eyes. She was my tether to the shadows of this town, a guide through its labyrinth of half-truths and lies. Yet even her fierce loyalty could not shield me from the weight of the room's collective suspicion. At the center of the gathering stood Victor Langley, his silver Venetian mask gleaming beneath the ornate chandelier like a shard of moonlight. His presence was magnetic, drawing the gaze of every guest with an effortless charisma that masked the ruthless ambition simmering beneath. When he spoke, his voice was a silken thread weaving through the tense atmosphere, binding his listeners in a web of charm and subtle menace. I met his gaze briefly, feeling the cold calculation behind those masked eyes. Victor was the puppet master of Veilshire's dark undercurrents, and tonight I was threading dangerously close to his strings. Detective Harker, ever the outsider in this masked world, lingered near the back, his rugged features unhidden by any disguise. His plain clothes set him apart like a beacon of reality amid the artifice. His eyes, however, were sharp and unyielding as they tracked my movements, weighing my intentions with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant alliance. The conversation turned toward the recent murder, the words carefully chosen, the accusations wrapped in layers of civility. I pressed forward, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. I challenged the silence that had cloaked the elite, refusing to let their secrets smother the truth any longer. Tensions snapped like a taut wire. Faces shifted behind their masks, alliances trembled, and the carefully constructed facade of unity cracked. Victor's smile tightened, a flicker of anger flashing through his eyes, but I stood my ground. In that charged moment, I understood that this confrontation was more than a mere clash of wills, it was a reckoning. The masks they wore could no longer hide the fractures beneath, and neither could I hide from the danger I was courting. As the evening wore on, the lines between friend and foe blurred, and the stakes climbed ever higher. Mara's caution was my compass, Harker's watchful presence my uneasy shield. Together, we had stepped into the heart of Veilshire's darkness, and there was no turning back. The gathering dispersed with whispered threats and promises, leaving me alone with the echo of my own defiance. The path ahead was perilous, but the truth was a flame I was determined to keep burning no matter what masks had to be shattered in the process. And as I walked away from the mansion, the weight of their gazes still heavy on my back, one question haunted me. How far would they go to protect their secrets? And how much of myself would I lose before the final mask was torn away? The game had changed. The cold sterility of the police station felt suffocating, almost more so than the weight of the accusations pressing against me. Detective Jonas Harker had folded out a series of photographs across the table, close-ups of fibers, smudges, and stains taken from the victim's clothing. The stark black and white images revealed a microscopic tapestry of threads and dust, each one a potential clue or a damning piece of evidence. My gaze lingered on the fibers. Some matched the distinctive weave of my jacket, the one I'd worn the night of the masked ball. A flicker of panic sparked in my chest. How had my fibers found their way onto the victim's clothes? Was this the proof they needed to condemn me? Harker's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. These fibers are consistent with what you were wearing, Elara. That's a problem. But there are also traces here that don't match anything linked to you. His eyes were sharp, calculating, but beneath the surface, I caught a glimpse of uncertainty. We were still piecing it together. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The line between implication and exoneration was razor thin, and I was walking it barefoot. The forensic evidence was a double-edged sword, slicing through my defenses and laying bare the tangled web of appearances and reality that Vailshire thrived upon. Later, seeking refuge from the oppressive atmosphere, I found myself in Mara Finch's antique shop. The cramped space smelled of old wood, faded leather, and the faint metallic tang of neglected secrets. Flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows on the masks and trinkets adorning every surface. Mara's delicate, feathered mask barely concealed the sharpness in her gaze as she spoke in low, measured tones. Vailshire isn't what it seems, Elara. You're rechasing shadows, and some masks hide more than faces. Trust is a dangerous currency here. Her words settled uneasily in my mind. The masks were more than ornamental. They were shields, weapons, and prisons. To uncover the truth, I'd have to pierce through layers of deception woven tightly by vanity and fear. The rain was relentless that evening as I walked the slick cobblestones, each footstep echoing softly under the pale glow of street lamps. Masked figures drifted past like phantoms, their faces hidden but their eyes alive with unreadable secrets. Clutching the forensic report, I felt the weight of isolation pressing down, but beneath it, a stubborn ember of determination refused to be extinguished. Back at the station, the tension between Harker and me reached a breaking point. The interrogation room was cold and stark. A metal table separated us like an invisible chasm of suspicion and reluctant necessity. His gaze was skeptical, but I saw the flicker of doubt behind the badge. "You're not as straightforward as you seem, Elara," he said, voice low but edged with something that could almost be respect. "And neither are you," I replied, meeting his eyes steadily. "We both want the truth, even if we don't realize it yet." The clock ticked relentlessly above us, marking the passage of time that neither of us could afford to waste. The forensic evidence had muddied the waters, but it had also opened a crack in the fortress of suspicion. I had to seize that chance before it closed. As the chapter closed, the line between performance and reality blurred further, the masks we wore becoming both shields and prisons. The path ahead was dark and twisted, but with every step I edged closer to the truth and to unmasking the killer hiding in plain sight. The atmosphere inside the grand hall was electric, an intoxicating blend of elegance and unease. Vailshire's second masked ball was in full swing, the ornate chandeliers casting fractured glimmers on a sea of faces hidden behind glittering masks. Elara Miles moved cautiously among the swirling crowd, her senses taut, every whisper and footstep sharpening her nerves. The weight of suspicion pressed down on her, but beneath it lay a fierce determination. Tonight, she would push closer to the truth. The music swelled, a haunting melody that wrapped around the dancers like a spell, masking the undercurrent of tension threading through the reverie. Alara's eyes darted from one masked face to another, searching for signs, for a crack in the flawless performance of the carnival town. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, practical as always, her attire chosen to blend into the shadows rather than stand out. Yet even as she tried to fade, she felt the invisible eyes tracking her, the silent judgment lurking behind every mask. She had arrived here with a purpose to unmask the killer, who had shattered the fragile veneer of Valeshire's annual celebration. But tonight the masks felt heavier, almost suffocating. The whispered rumors had grown louder, and the weight of accusation had become a tangible presence at her back. As Alara navigated through a tight cluster of dancers, a sudden brush of a gloved hand grazed her arm. The touch was deliberate, chillingly cold. A voice low and rough whispered from just behind her ear, "You retreading on dangerous ground, Alara. Some masks hide more than faces." She spun around, heart pounding, to face a figure cloaked in shadow. His silver Venetian mask gleamed ominously in the dim light, eyes piercing through the empty facade. The stranger's presence was both commanding and menacing, an embodiment of the town's dark undercurrents. Alara struggled to steady her breath, the room seeming to tilt as fear surged through her. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The masked man's lips curled into a faint, mocking smile. "A friend, or perhaps something else. Beware who you trust in Valeshire. The masks we wear are not just for show, they are shields, weapons, prisons." Before she could respond, the man vanished into the crowd like smoke, leaving behind only the echo of his warning. Alara's pulse thundered in her ears as she scanned the sea of faces, but the figure was gone. Panic and resolve collided within her, a chilling reminder that her quest for truth had drawn dangerous attention. Determined not to be paralyzed by fear, Alara pushed forward, weaving through the labyrinth of dancers and decorations. Her breath came in ragged gasps, footsteps echoing against the polished floor as she tried to put distance between herself and the unknown adversary. Yet the sense of being hunted tightened around her like a noose. Suddenly, a voice called out her name, soft but urgent. It was Mara Finch, her delicate feathered mask barely concealing the sharp features beneath. Mara's small form appeared at the edge of the crowd, beckoning Alara toward a narrow side corridor. "This way," Mara whispered, tugging her into the cramped space of her antique shop nestled just off the main hall. The flicker of candlelight cast dancing shadows against walls lined with carnival relics, creating a sanctuary amidst the chaos. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust, a stark contrast to the glittering spectacle outside. Mara's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "You've stirred something, Alara. They're rewatching you more closely than ever. Whoever confronted you is no mere stranger. They want to intimidate you, to drive you away." Alara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "But I can't run. Not now. The truth is closer than ever, and I have to see this through." Mara's eyes softened with fierce loyalty. "Then you will need allies and caution. Valeshire's masks hide many faces, but some shadows run deeper than others." As the music from the ball drifted faintly through the walls, Alara felt the weight of the night settle over her. The chase had begun in earnest, and the stakes had never been higher. Somewhere in the tangled web of vanity, fear, and deceit, the killer waited. And if she was to unmask them, she would have to confront not only the darkness in Valeshire, but the shadows threatening to consume her own identity. The night stretched on, thick with possibility and peril. Alara's breath hitched as the echo of footsteps faded into silence, leaving her alone with the relentless question, who had sent the masked warning? And how far would they go to keep their secrets safe? In Valeshire, the dance of masks was far from over, and Alara was determined to lead the final waltz. The air in Mara Finch's antique shop was thick with a mixture of dust, and the faint scent of aged paper, an atmosphere heavy with secrets, much like the town itself. Shadows stretched long across the cramped space, decorated with relics of carnival days past, faded posters, delicate masks mounted on walls, and glass cases crammed with trinkets that whispered of forgotten stories. Alara stood near the counter, her eyes locked on Mara's sharp features, barely visible behind a delicate mask of feathers. The faint strains of carnival music floated in from the streets, distorted by the cracked window, as if the town itself was playing a sinister lullaby. "I'm not sure I can protect you anymore," Mara muttered, her voice low and cautious. "Things are shifting, Alara. People are watching, and not all who smile mask friendship." Alara's heart thudded unevenly. "But you've always been my guide here. What's changed?" Mara's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and defiance. "The lines are blurring. Even those I trusted have begun to doubt." Veilshire breeds suspicion like weeds in a garden. The weight of Mara's words settled over Alara like a shroud. She realized that the fragile web of alliances she had counted on was unraveling, thread by thread. Later that evening, the tavern buzzed with low conversations and the clink of glasses. Thomas Grieve leaned against the bar, his unassuming presence belying the sharpness in his gaze. The room was a kaleidoscope of masks, some ornate, others simple, but all hiding something. Alara approached cautiously, aware that every whispered rumor about her might be carried on the breath of these masked patrons. Thomas met her eyes and gave a subtle nod, a gesture that spoke volumes in the language of guarded trust. "People are talking," he said quietly. "Not all good." Alara swallowed hard. "I know. You need to be careful who you lean on. This town doesn't forgive easily." His words were a stark reminder that her presence was a disruption, a threat to the carefully maintained facades. The next day, under flickering gas lamps outside the town hall, Detective Jonas Harker confronted Alara with a blunt urgency that cut through the evening chill. His rugged features were set in a permanent scowl, and while he rarely wore a mask, his demeanor was more guarded than ever. "You need to explain your movements during the ball," he said, voice low but firm. Alara met his gaze without flinching. "I've told you everything I know." Harker's eyes narrowed. "Not everything. There are inconsistencies, Alara, and the town doesn't take kindly to outsiders stirring trouble." The pressure was mounting, and Alara felt the walls closing in. She was caught in a web woven by distrust, suspicion, and the relentless pursuit of truth. That night, in a shadowed alley illuminated only by the distant glow of carnival lights, Lysandra Vale appeared like a spectre. Her mask, intricate and enigmatic, concealed her expression as she leaned close to Alara. "You were playing a dangerous game," Lysandra whispered, voice edged with warning. "Not everyone wants the truth uncovered. Some masks are meant to stay on." Alara's resolve hardened. The warnings, the betrayals, the shifting loyalties, they all fueled a fire within her. She would not be silenced or cast aside. But as the carnival's vibrant lights pulsed in the distance, Alara knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. Trust was a luxury she could ill afford. And in Veilshire, the masks people wore were shields and weapons. With every step forward, the lines between friend and foe blurred. The carnival's music swelled, a haunting reminder that beneath the festivity lay a darker dance, a dance Alara was determined to master, even if it meant risking everything. The night deepened, and Alara's thoughts raced. Who could she truly trust? And how much of herself was she willing to lay bare in the quest for truth? As the carnival's heartbeat echoed in her ears, she prepared for the challenges to come, aware that the next move could change everything. The dance of masks and shadows was far from over, and Alara was right in the middle of it, caught between loyalty and betrayal, truth and deception, performance and reality. Her story was unfolding, and the stakes had never been higher. The hunt for the killer was no longer just about the murder, it was about survival, identity, and the fragile hope of redemption. And as dawn approached, Alara felt the weight of the carnival's secrets pressing closer, threatening to consume her whole. Yet beneath the anxiety, a fierce determination burned bright to unmask the lies, to expose the truth, and to reclaim her own fractured identity. Veilshar's masks might conceal, but they could not hide everything not from her. The game was on, and Ilara intended to win. The small bell above Mara Finch's shop door tinkled softly as I stepped inside, the scent of aged paper and worn leather wrapping around me like a secret. Mara looked up from behind the cluttered counter, a subtle nod acknowledging my arrival. The usual bustle of Veilshar's carnival fade faded here, replaced by the quiet hum of history and hidden stories waiting to be unearthed. I spread the victim's diary across the wooden table, its pages yellowed and fragile. Alongside it, Mara's collection of antique carnival memorabilia, intricate masks, faded photographs, and delicate trinkets offered a tangible connection to the town's layered past. My fingers traced over the diary's cramped script, pausing on phrases I'd skimmed before. A mention of a secret meeting, a cryptic reference to the silver mask's price, and an unnamed betrayal that gnawed beneath the surface. As Mara poured us each a cup of dark, bitter tea, her sharp eyes watched me. "You see what others miss, Ilara," she said quietly, "but don't let the masks blind you to who's wearing them." Those words echoed in my mind as I left the shop and wandered toward the rusted lantern, the town's dimly lit tavern. Inside, the murmur of voices mixed with the clatter of glasses, creating a soundtrack of whispered secrets and half-truths. Thomas Grieve, ever the sentinel of Veilshar's undercurrents, beckoned me over with a nod. He leaned close, his breath carrying the faint scent of oil and smoke. "There's talk about the victims last night, something about a meeting that went sideways," he murmured, eyes darting toward the dark corners where shadows seemed to gather like conspirators. "People are scared, Ilara, and fear makes liars of us all." I nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. Fear, vanity, and desperation were the masks everyone here wore as naturally as their ornate disguises. Later, I met with Detective Jonas Harker in his spa's office, the only place in Veilshire where masks came off, at least figuratively. Flickering candlelight danced across his rugged face, casting long shadows that mirrored the doubts flickering in his eyes. He laid out the forensic reports with a sigh. "Some of this evidence doesn't add up," he admitted, his tone grudging but honest. "The prints, the timing. Someone's been careful, but not careful enough." I shared my observations, the overlooked glance between two masked guests, the misplaced cameo brooch I'd found near the scene, the diary's cryptic notes. Together, we began to weave a tapestry of motive and opportunity, each thread revealing the complex dance of vanity and fear that had led to murder. That night, beneath the flickering carnival lights, I found myself drawn to the square where Lysandra Vale performed her mesmerizing masked dance. Her movements were sharp and fluid, a silent language spoken in twirls and steps. Watching her, I realized the town's masks weren't just physical, they were gestures, glances, silences. The dance was a code, one I was beginning to decipher. The pieces were coming together. The victim's double life, Victor Langley's looming presence, the whispered betrayals. I could almost see the pattern hidden beneath Veilshar's glittering facade. But with each revelation, the danger grew. Eyes watched me more closely now, shadows lengthened, and trust became a currency I could scarcely afford. I clenched my fists, determination hardening within me. The truth was there, buried beneath layers of deception and vanity. I had to find it and unmask the killer before the masks closed in around me, trapping me in a lie I couldn't escape. As the cold night air brushed against my face, I whispered to myself, "Every mask hides a secret. Tonight I'll uncover them all." And with that resolve, I stepped deeper into the maze of Veilshar's hidden truths, knowing that the next moves would either reveal the light or swallow me into darkness. The train hissed to a halt, its brakes screeching a wary goodbye as I stepped onto the platform of Veilshire. The evening air was cool, carrying a faint scent of popcorn and something floral, perhaps jasmine from the gardens lining the crooked streets. A distant melody floated through the mist, a carnival tune that felt both inviting and strangely melancholic. Around me, faces were concealed behind masks of every shape and color. Some were delicate and ornate, like porcelain butterflies resting on noses. Others were simple leather affairs, stark and unyielding. The masks hid more than skin, they hid stories, secrets, identities. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling the weight of my bag and the unfamiliarity pressing in. Vailshire was a town unlike any I'd covered before, a place where anonymity wasn't just a quirk but a way of life. My assignment was straightforward on paper: cover the annual masked ball, a glittering event drawing the town's reclusive residents into the spotlight. But beneath the carnival lights, I sensed something darker, a tension simmering under the surface like a secret waiting to explode. I moved through the crowd, my eyes sharp behind my own simple mask, a plain black piece, designed to blend in rather than stand out. The faces around me were expressions frozen in painted smiles and carved features, impossible to read. I caught snippets of laughter, whispered conversations, the clink of glasses. But something about the air was off, like the town itself was holding its breath. Pausing on a narrow street lined with faded posters and flickering lanterns, I watched a group of masked figures pass by. Their movements were fluid yet guarded, as if every step was measured and deliberate. I made mental notes: the way a hand twitched beneath a velvet sleeve, the subtle tilt of a masked head, details I knew would matter later. My lodging was a small inn on the edge of the carnival district, its weathered sign swinging softly in the breeze. The innkeeper greeted me with a nod, his own mask a swirling pattern of gold that caught the lamplight. Our exchange was polite but clipped, the kind of conversation that danced around truths rather than landing on them. As I settled into my room, the muffled sounds of the town's nightlife seeped through the thin walls: laughter, music, footsteps on cobblestones, all wrapped in the ever-present veil of mystery. I dressed carefully that night, choosing clothes that would let me move unnoticed among the guests at the ball. The mask I donned was simple but elegant, designed to hide as much of me as it revealed. Standing before the mirror, I caught my own eyes staring back, sharp and alert. This was no ordinary story. Something was waiting to be uncovered, and I was the one who would find it. But already a gnawing doubt crept in: who could I trust in a town where no one showed their true face? And more frighteningly, who might be watching me from behind those masks? As the clock ticked closer to the ball, I stepped outside into the misty night, the carnival lights glowing faintly like distant stars. The music swelled, a haunting tune that seemed to pull at the edges of my resolve. Vailshire was alive with secrets, and I was here to unmask them all, even if it meant losing parts of myself in the process. Night had fallen on Vailshire, but sleep was a stranger I could not invite. My small rented room felt more like a cage than a refuge, the flickering candle casting grotesque shadows that danced on the faded wallpaper. I sat at the rickety desk, notes and fragments of the victim's diary scattered before me like shards of a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting parts of a truth that refused to come whole. I traced a trembling finger over a cryptic entry, the ink smudged as if the writer had agonized over every word. The victim's double life was more complex than I'd imagined, veiled in layers of secrecy that mirrored the town itself. But the deeper I dug, the more the walls seemed to close in. Was it the weight of the case? Or was Vailshire's culture of masks finally seeping into my mind, blurring what was real and what was performance? The knock at the door startled me, jerking me from my spiraling thoughts. It was Mara. Her delicate feathered mask sat slightly askew as she stepped inside, the faint scent of lavender mixing with the musty antiques in her shop that clung to her clothes. Her eyes, sharp and cautious, held a warning. "Alara," she whispered, glancing around to ensure we were alone, "you retreading on dangerous ground. The more you pry, the more eyes will watch. Trust no one, not even those who seem closest." Her words echoed the gnawing suspicion that had taken root in me. I nodded, swallowing the lump of fear rising in my throat. Mara's shop was a sanctuary of sorts, filled with relics of past carnivals and forgotten stories, but even here, the weight of secrets pressed down. Later, I met with Detective Jonas Harker. His rugged features were set in a mask of professional detachment, but the intensity of his gaze betrayed the pressure he felt. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the carnival's surreal vibrancy. He questioned me with a measured calm that felt more like a challenge than an inquiry. "Elara, your presence at the scene, your connections to the victim. The evidence points to you," he said quietly, the words like sharpened knives. "Why should I believe your version?" I met his eyes, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Because I want the truth as much as you do. Because I'm not the killer." His silence was a verdict of its own, and I left feeling more hunted than ever. As I wandered the lantern-lit streets, the carnival lights flickered like distant stars, casting long shadows that twisted and merged. I caught glimpses of masked figures watching from doorways, their faces hidden but their intentions unreadable. A chill ran down my spine. Was I being followed? Or was it the paranoia clawing at my mind, turning every shadow into a threat? Back in my room, I paced, trying to disentangle fact from fear. Every conversation replayed in my mind, every glance scrutinized for hidden meanings. The town's performance of anonymity was suffocating, and I was caught in the tangled act, unsure of my own role. But amidst the paranoia, a stubborn flame of resolve burned. I would not be consumed by doubt or silenced by fear. The masks would fall. The truth would come to light, even if it meant unmasking parts of myself I'd rather keep hidden. The night stretched on, a relentless test of my sanity and will. Valeshire's secrets were closing in, and I had to decide, surrender to the shadows or fight through the darkness toward a truth that might change everything. And as the first pale light of dawn seeped through the curtains, I knew the game was far from over. The masks were still on, but soon, very soon, they would crack. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the stained glass windows of Mara Finch's antique shop, bathing the cluttered room in a kaleidoscope of muted colors. Elara sat cross-legged on the creaky wooden floor, a fragile bundle of letters and faded photographs spread before her like a treasure trove of secrets. The scent of old paper mingled with the faint aroma of dried lavender that Mara always kept tucked away in the corners of her shop. Mara stood nearby, her delicate feathered mask perched slightly askew as she watched Elara's eyes scan each letter with an intensity bordering on desperation. "These aren't just random correspondences," Mara said softly, breaking the heavy silence. "They belong to the victim, and they reveal a side of him no one in Valeshire suspected." Elara's fingers trembled as she unfolded a letter, the ink smudged but the words unmistakably clear. The victim, a man celebrated among the town's elite, had been leading a double life, a secret lover in a neighboring town, coded messages hinting at clandestine meetings, and cryptic references to debts and betrayals. It was a web she hadn't anticipated, one that made the murder infinitely more tangled. Why would he hide this? Elara murmured, more to herself than Mara. And who else knows? The question hovered unanswered in the air. Later that evening, Elara found herself seated across from Detective Jonas Harker in the stark interrogation room at the Valeshire precinct. The harsh fluorescent light above cast unforgiving shadows across his rugged, unmasked face. His gaze was sharp, scrutinizing, but there was a flicker of something else, reluctance, perhaps when he looked at Elara. "So this double life," Harker began, tapping a file on the table, "it changes everything. The victim wasn't just a respected figure. He was a man with secrets that could ruin more than a few reputations." Elara nodded, her voice steady despite the turmoil roiling inside her. "And it means the motive for murder could be far broader than we thought. Jealousy, blackmail, revenge, any of it could fit." Harker sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It complicates my investigation and yours, but it also means we need to be more careful about who we trust." The weight of his words settled heavily between them. That night, Elara wandered the fog-shrouded streets of Valeshire alone. The dense mist curled around the gas lamps, casting eerie halos of orange light. Her breath rose in pale puffs, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness that seemed to seep into her bones. The revelation of the victim's double life gnawed at her, sparking a cascade of doubts. Was anyone truly what they appeared to be? Was she now entangled in a game far more dangerous than she had imagined? Her footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestones as she grappled with the reality unfolding before her. The masks everyone wore in glittering balls, in whispered conversations, in the very fabric of Valeshire's existence, were no longer just symbols of tradition. They were shields hiding wounds, lies, and perhaps killers. A sudden ring from her phone jolted her from her thoughts. It was Mara, her voice a hurried whisper laced with urgency. "Alara, I found something else. The victim's secret isn't isolated. There are others people who could be next if we don't act." The line went dead, leaving Alara alone with the chilling truth. The double life she had uncovered wasn't just a clue, it was a warning. As dawn approached, Alara sat at her cramped desk, the weight of the investigation pressing down like a physical force. She knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, but the truth, no matter how deeply buried, was hers to unearth. And she would do so, even if it meant facing the darkest corners of Valeshire and herself. The masks might hide their faces, but not forever. The time to unmask was coming, and Alara was determined to be ready. The carnival town of Valeshire had a way of swallowing you whole, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Every corner, every flickering lantern, every whispered secret seemed to conspire to blur the lines between what was real and what was performance. Tonight, standing before the cracked carnival mirror in the deserted corridor of the old funhouse, I felt it all too keenly. The reflection staring back was fractured in shards of glass, a kaleidoscope of my masked self splintered against glimpses of my bare face. It was as if the mirror was mocking me, forcing me to confront the very thing I'd been running from, my own fears and vanity. The soft strains of carnival music drifted through the night air, muffled and haunting, a ghostly echo of the festivities I had watched so closely in the days before the murder. Laughter bubbled faintly from somewhere distant, but here, in this shadowed corridor, it felt like a cruel reminder of the divide between the world I saw and the one I inhabited. Who was I beneath this mask? Was I still Alara Miles, the determined journalist chasing truth? Or had I become just another performer in this macabre carnival, hiding behind layers of self-deception? I traced a finger along the fractured glass, where my eyes met their own gaze in 100 distorted angles. It was exhausting, this dance of appearances, but I had no choice. The murder had ripped the town's facade open, but it also tore at my own carefully constructed self-image. I had come here to uncover secrets, but in doing so, had I simply exposed my own vulnerabilities. Later, I found myself in Mara Finch's antique shop, a sanctuary of dusty memories and carnival relics stacked precariously on every shelf. The air smelled of aged wood and forgotten stories. Mara, with her feathered mask sitting lightly against her sharp features, regarded me with an intensity that was both comforting and unnerving. "You're chasing shadows," she said quietly, voice edged with caution. "But sometimes the darkest shadows are the ones we carry inside ourselves." Her words hung between us like a fragile truce. Mara had been my guide through Valeshire's labyrinth of secrets, but tonight she seemed to challenge me not as an ally, but as a mirror reflecting my own blind spots. She knew the town's masks were more than mere carnival trappings, they were symbols of fear, vanity, and survival. "I don't have the luxury of doubt," I replied, voice barely above a whisper. "Not when everything is on the line." She tilted her head, feathers fluttering softly. "But what if the line isn't where you think it is? What if, in trying to expose others, you lose sight of who you really are?" Her gaze pierced through my defenses, and for a moment, I felt the weight of my own vanity, the desperate need to be right, to be seen as capable, to hold on to an identity forged through years of relentless investigation. The fear of failure was a mask just as potent as any silver Venetian face Victor Langley wore. Speaking of Victor, his presence was never far behind. As dusk settled over the town, the street carnival lit up with flickering lanterns and the vibrant chaos of masked revelers. I caught sight of him across the crowd, tall, imposing, his silver Venetian mask gleaming under the intermittent glow of the lights. His voice, when he spoke to me later, was low and oily with charm, but beneath it lurked a threat I couldn't ignore. "Alara," he said, stepping closer, "some truths are better left buried beneath the masks. You're replaying a dangerous game. Walk away and you might still keep your face intact." His words were a poison wrapped in silk, seductive and menacing all at once. But I refused to be cowed. This was my story, my fight. Yet Victor's presence reminded me how fragile my grasp on reality was becoming, how easy it was to be swallowed by the very shadows I sought to illuminate. Later that night, I found solace on a quiet rooftop overlooking the swirling mass of masked figures below. The cool night air was sharp, and the distant Colliope song spiraled through the darkness, a haunting melody that seemed to echo the turmoil inside me. I breathed deeply, trying to steady the whirlwind of fear and defiance swirling in my chest. I realized then that this wasn't just a murder investigation, it was a battle for my own identity. In Vailshire, where masks were worn to hide and protect, I had to find a way to keep my true self visible, even if only to me. The cost of truth was steep, but the cost of surrender was higher. My reflection in the broken mirror had shown me the danger of losing myself behind the masks of others. But it also helped me see the strength buried beneath the fear. I was not just a spectator here. I was a participant in the cruel performance, and I would not let the darkness win. Tomorrow, the carnival would continue, the masks would remain, but I would face the coming storm with eyes wide open. For in Vailshire, the only way to unmask the truth was to first unmask yourself, and I was ready to do just that. The night deepened, but my resolve only grew. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, not just from the killer still lurking in the shadows, but from the parts of myself I had yet to confront. But as the moon cast pale light over Vailshire's masked streets, I felt a fierce determination take root. Fear might be the currency of this town, but so was courage. I tucked the feathered mask Mara had pressed into my hand into my coat pocket, a small talisman against the darkness. It was time to step out from behind the fractured reflections, to face the masks, the lies, and the terrifying truths waiting in the carnival's heart. The game was far from over, but now I was playing with my eyes wide open. And that made all the difference. What would it mean for me if I truly exposed myself? Could I survive the unmasking, or would the revelation shatter me completely? That was the question that haunted me as the carnival lights flickered and the night whispered its secrets. But I had no choice but to find out. The fluorescent hum of the police station was almost hypnotic, a steady drone that filled the air as Detective Jorka's sat hunched over his cluttered desk. The scattered files, witness statements, and forensic reports were laid out before him like pieces of a puzzle he was no longer sure he could complete. Something about the case didn't sit right. The more he reviewed the details, the more the edges blurred, and the picture he thought he'd seen so clearly now seemed fractured and incomplete. Alara Miles had been the prime suspect from the start, her presence at the scene, the circumstantial evidence. The whispered accusations that rippled through Vailshire like a dark tide. But now, as Harker flipped through the victim's diary once more, cross-referencing timelines and alibis, a gnawing sense of doubt took root. The forensic evidence, while damning on the surface, contained inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. The fingerprints found on the murder weapon were partial, smudged beyond certainty. Witness accounts conflicted, and some testimonies seemed less like observations and more like rehearsed performances. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, the weight of the investigation pressing down on him. Vailshire's culture of masks and secrets had made his job a labyrinthine challenge. But it was Alara's sharp mind and relentless pursuit of truth that had unsettled the town's fragile balance. Perhaps she was more victim than villain. Later that evening, the cafe on the corner of Wraith Street was nearly deserted, save for the quiet clink of cups and the low murmur of the few patrons scattered around. Alara sat at a secluded table, eyes scanning the darkened street outside, when Harker slipped in, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hood. Miles he greeted, his voice low, cautious. "Detective," she replied, her tone guarded but hopeful. They exchanged a long look, two wary allies trapped in a dance of suspicion and necessity. Harker slid a folder across the table, the edges worn from frequent handling. "I've been going over the evidence again," he admitted. "Some things don't add up. The diary, witness statements. I think we might have been too quick to pin this on you." Alara's breath caught, a flicker of relief sparking in her chest. "You think I'm innocent?" He shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. "I think there's more to this than we've seen. But we need to be careful. The town doesn't like its secrets disturbed. Their conversation was a fragile truce, a tentative alliance forged in the shadows of distrust." As they spoke, beneath the glow of the carnival lights outside, masked figures twirled and laughed, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath their painted facades. Alara stepped outside after the meeting, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The carnival's flickering lanterns cast long shadows on the cobblestone streets, and the haunting melodies of distant music filled the air. She watched the swirling dancers, their elaborate masks hiding every expression, every intention. In Valeshire, the masks were more than costumes, they were shields, identities, prisons. A subtle shift had begun, both in the investigation and within herself. Harker's change in attitude was the first crack in the wall of suspicion that had surrounded her, offering a glimmer of hope amid the pervasive darkness. Yet the path ahead remained perilous, lined with deceit and danger. Back in her room, Alara stood before the cracked mirror, the dim light flickering as shadows danced across her face. She studied her reflection, the dark hair pulled back tightly, the piercing eyes that had seen too much, the faint lines of exhaustion etched into her skin. The woman staring back at her was both herself and a stranger, caught between the masks she wore and the truths she sought. The mask of the journalist, the mask of the suspect, the mask of the seeker of truth, they all blurred into one. And as she gazed deeply into her own fractured image, Alara felt a steely resolve harden within her. Whatever Valeshire hid beneath its carnival charm, she would uncover it. The tide was turning, and with it, the fragile balance of power and deception in the town would be tested like never before. But the question lingered, heavy and insistent: who could truly be trusted when everyone wore a mask? The night stretched on, thick with uncertainty and the promise of revelations yet to come, as Alara prepared herself for the battles that lay ahead. The cramped interior of Mara Finch's antique shop smelled of musk and forgotten stories. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the shelves lined with carnival memorabilia, porcelain masks, faded photographs, and delicate glass figurines that seemed to capture whispers of laughter and sorrow in equal measure. As I stepped further inside, the air grew heavier, weighted with the unspoken. Mara's sharp eyes met mine, her delicate feathered mask shifting slightly as she regarded me with a mixture of caution and resolve. "You wanted to see me," I said quietly, my voice barely above the hum of the town outside. She nodded, motioning toward a small, cluttered desk nestled in the back corner. "There's something you need to know," she began, her voice low and steady despite the tremor I detected beneath. "About me and this town." I perched on the edge of a creaking wooden chair, every sense alert. Mara reached beneath the desk, producing an old, weathered box tied with a fraying ribbon. The moment felt heavy, as if I were about to unearth not just objects, but the very soul of Valeshire's hidden past. "My family hasn't always been on the sidelines," Mara confessed, tracing the box's worn edges with a finger. "We were once deeply entangled in the town's darkest dealings. Secrets no one dared to speak aloud. I swallowed, the pieces of the puzzle shifting uneasily in my mind. Why tell me this now? She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Because you are not like the others. You see beneath the masks, and because the danger you face is greater than you realize. The weight of her words settled over me, mingling with the cold draft that slipped beneath the cracked windowpane. I wanted to ask more. Who exactly had Mara's family been protecting? What sins had been buried beneath layers of carnival glitter? But the sudden knock at the door cut through the moment like a blade. Mara's hand darted to a hidden compartment beneath the desk, swiftly concealing a thin, folded document. Her eyes locked with mine, urgency flaring in their depths. No one else can know about this, she warned. Not yet. I nodded, understanding the gravity of the trust she placed in me. Veilshire's shadows were growing longer, and with Mara's revelation, the lines between friend and foe blurred even further. As I stepped back into the night, the distant strains of carnival music drifted through the cold air, eerie and haunting. Behind me, Mara's silhouette lingered in the shop's window, her mask half removed, exposing a face etched with both defiance and pain. The truth was no longer just mine to uncover. It belonged to both of us now, tangled in the fragile web of loyalty and deceit that bound Veilshire's faceless souls. And as the town's secrets edged ever closer to the surface, I knew the cost of unveiling them would be higher than I had ever imagined. But I had to know, I had to see beyond the masks, no matter the price. And Mara, for all her guardedness, had just become my most vital ally or my greatest risk. The night deepened, and with it, the carnival's enduring facade seemed to shimmer with new menace. Somewhere beneath the layers of glitter and shadow, the killer watched, waiting, and I was more entwined in Veilshire's mysteries than ever before. I clenched my fists, resolve hardening like steel. This was far from over. The air inside Mara Finch's antique shop was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust, a tangible reminder that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always lingers. Flickering candlelight cast long shadows across shelves, cluttered with carnival memorabilia, old masks, faded photographs, and trinkets that whispered of forgotten stories. Mara's delicate feathered mask shimmered faintly in the dim light as she leaned forward, voice low and cautious. Alara, she began, her eyes sharp yet wary, the deeper you dig, the more you risk tearing this town apart. Veilshire isn't just a place of masks for show. The masks here protect us from truths that could break us all. Alara swallowed hard, the weight of Mara's words settling over her like a shroud. She had known the investigation was dangerous, but this felt different, more intimate, more devastating. What aren't you telling me? Alara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mara hesitated, fingers tracing the grooves of an old Venetian mask on the counter. My family. We've been outcasts for generations. There are secrets about the elite, about Victor Langley, that even I was afraid to confront. If those come to light, the fallout won't just be social, it could be violent. The room seemed to close in, the shadows pressing against Alara's resolve. Yet within that darkness, a flame of determination flickered. I have to know, she said firmly, no matter the cost. Outside, the carnival's distant music echoed a haunting melody that seemed both a celebration and a dirge. Alara stepped into the chill night air, the cobblestones slick with recent rain. Her breath misted before her as she pulled her coat tighter. Her mind raced with the implications of Mara's revelation. Veilshire's veneer of festivity barely concealed a fragile lattice of fear and vanity. Exposing the truth could shatter that delicate balance, but silence was no longer an option. The next morning brought a stark contrast. The sterile, unforgiving light of the police station's interrogation room bore down on Alara as Detective Jonas Harker sat across from her, his rugged features tense and unreadable. He rarely wore a mask, his face a map of skepticism and wary duty. Alara, he said, his tone measured but edged with suspicion, every piece of evidence we've gathered points toward you. Motive, opportunity. She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm not the killer, Jonas. You know that," he sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I want to believe you. But in Velshar, nothing is as it seems." The conversation was a chess match, each probing the other's defenses. Yet beneath the interrogation lurked a grudging respect to flawed people caught in the web of a town that thrived on deception. Days later, beneath the flickering torches of the carnival grounds, Alara found herself amid the swirling, masked figures. Their movements were hypnotic, a dance of shadows and light that blurred reality into performance. Victor Langley stood apart, his silver Venetian mask gleaming ominously under the glow. His presence was magnetic, yet cold, an embodiment of the town's seductive danger. Alara's eyes locked on his, a silent challenge rippling between them. She saw past the mask, glimpsing the ruthless ambition and hidden insecurities that fueled his control. The carnival's cacophony felt distant as Alara retreated to the rain-slicked streets. The music's haunting strains clashed with the pounding of her heart. The cost of truth weighed heavy. To unmask the killer was to risk everything: her safety, her sanity, the fragile threads holding Velshar together. Yet the fire within her would not be quenched. As dawn approached, Alara's resolve hardened. She knew the road ahead would be perilous, but truth demanded sacrifice. The masks might remain, but soon the shadows they cast would be illuminated, and no secret would stay hidden forever. And with that, the game escalated. The cost of truth was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and Alara was ready to pay the price. The night stretched on, thick with shadows and secrets, as I sat in Mara Fink's cramped antique shop, the air heavy with the scent of aged paper and dust. Flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows across the shelves where carnival memorabilia whispered of forgotten times. Mara's eyes, sharp and unblinking behind her delicate feathered mask, bore into me as she unfolded a collection of letters and documents shed unearthed. "These," she murmured, "are the threads that tie the town's elite together, a tapestry woven with lies and ambition." I leaned closer, heart pounding, as she laid out the correspondence's secret deals, veiled threats, and alliances forged in the murky depths beneath Veleshar's glittering surface. Every name was a link in a chain of vanity and fear, a chain strong enough to strangle truth itself. Mara's voice was low, urgent, a steady pulse amid the shop's creaks and groans. "Victor Langley is at the center," she said, "but he doesn't stand alone." The realization hit me like a cold wave. This was no simple murder born of passion or accident. It was the inevitable eruption of a festering rot beneath the town's ornate masks. Each betrayal was a mask itself, worn to hide insecurity, to manipulate, to control. Later, beneath the silver glow of a reluctant moon, I found myself in the shadowed alley behind the carnival tents. The scent of damp earth and fading reverie hung in the air as Victor Langley emerged from the darkness, his silver Venetian mask catching what little light there was, transforming his face into an impassive, gleaming enigma. "Alara," he greeted me, voice smooth as silk, but with an edge that cut beneath the pleasantries. "I see you've been busy unearthing things best left buried." His charisma was undeniable, but beneath it lay a cold, ruthless ambition that sent a shiver down my spine. "You have a knack for hiding behind masks," I said, "but even the brightest mask cracks under enough pressure." Victor's eyes, sharp and calculating behind the mask, flickered with something unreadable. "And yet here you are, poking into shadows where you don't belong." Careful, the darkness bites. Our confrontation was a dance of veiled threats and half-truths, a performance as intricate as the carnival itself. But I was no longer just a spectator. I was a player, risking everything to unmask the rot at Velshar's core. Back in town, Detective Jonas Harker sat alone in his cluttered office, the harsh glare of a desk lamp illuminating a sea of evidence sprawled before him. The weight of what Mara and I had uncovered pressed heavily on him. Each piece of evidence complicated the picture, implicating not just Victor, but several pillars of the community. He rubbed his temples, wrestling with the implications and the uncomfortable truth that justice in Vailshire was as masked and elusive as its residents. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit tavern where whispers carried like smoke, Lysandra Vale took to the small makeshift stage. Her mask gleamed under the flickering lanterns as she began a dance, sharp, deliberate movements that cut through the room's tense silence. It was more than performance. It was a statement, a challenge to the lies cloaking the town. Eyes followed her every step, some with suspicion, others with grudging respect. The evening's performance was a metaphor for the unmasking I sought, the revelation of deception beneath layers of vanity and fear. But as the dance ended, the weight of what lay ahead pressed in. Exposing these betrayals would not only fracture the town's fragile facade, but put me squarely in the crosshairs of those desperate to keep their secrets hidden. I left the tavern with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the path ahead was perilous. Yet, the truth demanded to be told. Vailshire's masks were slipping, and the web of betrayals was unraveling thread by thread. As I walked through the deserted streets, the carnival lights flickering like dying embers, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkest performance was yet to come. The question was no longer who had killed, but how far I was willing to go to expose the truth, and what price I would pay for unmasking the lies that had ensnared us all. I clenched my fists, the cold night air biting at my skin. Vanity and fear, the twin forces that had orchestrated this tragedy, were powerful, but they were not invincible. And neither was I. The masquerade was ending. It was time for the final act. The room was thick with a silence so dense it felt almost physical. Pressing against my chest as Victor Langley's silver Venetian mask caught the low chandelier light and flickered like a cold flame. His posture was rigid, an almost imperceptible tremor running through his fingers as he leaned forward, his voice measured but brittle. "You truly believe you have something on me, Alara?" he asked, each word a challenge wrapped in silk. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to let the mask of charm and menace unnerve me. "I don't believe Victor. I know. The diary, the whispers, the alliances fraying at your edges, all of it points to cracks you can no longer hide behind your silver mask." He laughed then, a sound that started smooth but quickly spiraled into something strained and hollow. "Vailshire is mine to command. You read just a curious journalist poking at shadows." "No," I said quietly, stepping closer. "I'm the person standing between you and the truth. And it's catching up to you." Victor's eyes, visible through the eye holes of his mask, flashed with a mixture of fury and something darker, fear. It was the first real crack I'd seen in his carefully constructed facade. For years, he'd been the puppeteer, the charismatic face of Vailshire's elite, manipulating loyalties and silencing opposition with equal parts charm and menace. But now, under the weight of evidence and my relentless pursuit, the mask was slipping. From the shadows, Mara Finch's delicate feathered mask peeked around the doorway of Victor's parlor. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked between us, a quiet storm of hope and caution. Mara had warned me of the dangers in confronting Victor, but she also knew it was necessary. Across town, Detective Jonas Harker sat stiffly at a clandestine meeting of Vailshire's elite, his rugged face set in a hard line. The fractures in their unity were no longer subtle. Whispers of Victor's faltering control buzzed through the room like an electric current. Harker's skepticism had deepened into a quiet determination, the kind that comes from knowing the law is often a thin veneer over darker truths. Back in Victor's parlor, the tension reached a crescendo. "You underestimate me, Alara," Victor snarled, his voice cracking just enough to betray his panic. "I've built this town from masks and shadows. You can't tear that down." "Maybe not alone," I said, "but you're not as untouchable as you think. People are waking up. They're tired of the lies." His silver mask seemed to dull in the dim light, the gleam fading as the reality of his unraveling sank in. I left his house that night with the cold air biting at my cheeks, the distant carnival lights flickering like ghosts behind me. The mask Victor wore so impeccably had cracked, and with it, The foundations of Valeshire's dark underbelly were exposed to the first rays of dawn. But the game was far from over. As Victor's grip loosened, the stakes soared higher. The shadows I chased grew deeper, and the truth I sought threatened not just the town, but my very identity. Every step forward was a step into the unknown, and I had no choice but to keep moving, no matter the cost. The carnival's music echoed faintly on the wind, a haunting reminder that beneath the reverie lay a world of secrets, still waiting to be unearthed. And I was the one they all feared would unmask them. The mask was cracking, and soon Valeshire would never be the same again. The antique shop was cloaked in shadows, its narrow windows fogged by the persistent drizzle outside. Mara Finch, ever cautious, had insisted Alara come here alone. As the bell chimed softly over the door, I stepped inside, the scent of old wood and faded memories wrapping around me like a shroud. Mara's shop was a labyrinth of relics, tarnished masks, cracked mirrors, and dusty trunks bursting with forgotten stories. I moved towards a large, battered chest that Mara had pointed out earlier, its iron clasps rusted but still holding firm. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid, revealing a tangle of letters, photographs, and brittle papers yellowed with age. The storm outside rumbled low, punctuating the silence between the crackling of the fireplace and the distant carnival music that drifted faintly through the walls. It was here, in this quiet cavern of secrets, that I stumbled upon the first thread of my own buried past. A faded photograph slipped from the pile, tumbling to the floor. I knelt to retrieve it, breath catching as I recognized the figure beside a young me, someone I'd long tried to forget. The image was grainy, but the eyes were unmistakable, the victim. My pulse quickened, and a cold knot twisted in my stomach. How had this connection eluded me until now? The victim, whose death had set this entire nightmare in motion, was somehow part of a chapter I had deliberately closed. Mara's voice was a whisper behind me, sharp yet gentle. Valeshire's masks aren't just worn on faces. Some are stitched into the fabric of your history, Alara. You can't run from that. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down as I sifted through a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. One letter, in particular, caught my eye, its handwriting familiar yet jarring. It spoke of promises and regrets, of secrets shared in confidence, and betrayals concealed beneath layers of polite smiles and veiled threats. Later, as I stepped out into the rain-slicked streets, Detective Jonas Harker's figure emerged from the shadows. His presence was unexpected yet oddly reassuring. He held a small envelope, his expression unreadable beneath the harsh streetlights. "We have new forensic analysis," he said quietly, voice low to avoid prying ears. "It's complicated. There's evidence that ties you to the victim, but not in the way anyone suspects. You need to see this." I took the envelope, fingers brushing against his briefly. The tension between us was palpable, a fragile truce in a town where trust was a currency too costly to spend lightly. We exchanged few words, the silence between us charged with unspoken questions and mutual wariness. That night, back in my room, the shadows seemed to close in as I stared into the cracked mirror. The flickering candle cast my masked reflection in fractured light, each shard a distorted version of who I thought I was. Memories surged unbidden, a clandestine meeting, a hurried farewell, the echo of a voice I'd tried to silence. The past was no longer a distant shore, but a tempest threatening to drown me. I grappled with the revelation that the victim and I had shared a tangled history, one that now threatened to unravel everything I had fought to build. The lines between hunter and hunted blurred as I questioned my own motives and the fragile identity I clung to. Could I trust myself to see through the masks around me when my own face was obscured by shadows? The night deepened, but sleep eluded me. My thoughts spiraled, a whirlwind of fear and defiance. The evidence from my past was a double-edged blade. It could clear my name or sever the last ties to my former self. Yet, beneath the anxiety, a steely resolve took root. I would confront whatever truth surfaced, no matter how painful. because the masks of Veilshire were not just worn by the townsfolk, they were etched into the very soul of this cursed place. Dawn was still hours away when I finally lay down, the weight of the past pressing heavily on my chest. Tomorrow the investigation would deepen, and the secrets I'd uncovered would ripple through the fragile alliances I'd forged. But for now, in the quiet before the storm, I understood one thing with cold clarity. In Veilshire, the past was never truly gone. It waited hidden beneath layers of performance and deception, ready to unmask us all. And I was ready to face it, no matter the cost. The next morning brought a brittle chill, the carnival town stirring beneath a grey sky. I met Mara again at her shop, the windows fogged as she prepared a pot of bitter tea. "You rechanging Alara," she said softly, eyes sharp behind her feathered mask. "Veilshire has a way of digging up what we bury deepest." I nodded, the truth settling like dust in my lungs. I never imagined my past would become part of this story. "Sometimes," Mara replied, "the past is the key to unlocking the present's darkest secrets." Detective Harker joined us shortly after, his gaze steady but cautious. "The evidence complicates things," he admitted. "But it also opens new paths. We need to tread carefully." Together, the three of us began to piece together fragments of my history and the victim's secrets, navigating the blurred lines of trust and deception. Each revelation carved deeper into the mystery, but also into my resolve. The masks we wore concealed more than faces, they hid pain, ambition, and fear. As Veilshire's carnival melodies played from a distance, I realized that the journey ahead would test not only my investigative skills, but the very core of who I was. The past was no longer a shadow to escape, but a truth to embrace. However jagged and painful its edges, the game had changed, and so had I. With that, I steeled myself to dive back into the heart of Veilshire's darkness, knowing that uncovering the truth would demand everything I had and more. The chill of the early evening seeped through the cracks of Mara's antique shop, curling around the stacks of carnival memorabilia and casting a spectral glow over the scattered maps and notes sprawled across the worn wooden table. Alara leaned in, her breath misting in the cold air, eyes scanning the intricate layout of Veilshire's carnival grounds. Every alley, every tent, every shadowed corner had been marked, mapped, and considered. Mara's delicate feathered mask rested lightly on her face as she pointed to a secluded alcove near the central square, her voice low and steady. "This is where the second mask ball will draw its crowd," Mara whispered, "and it's where we can set the trap. If the killer comes back, it will be here." Alara nodded, the weight of the plan settling heavily on her shoulders. The risk was undeniable. They were inviting danger, daring the murderer to make a move under the very eyes of Veilshire's watchful masses. But the alternative was stagnation, another day lost to suspicion and fear. Across town, Detective Jonas Harker stood beneath the dull glow of a street lamp outside the town hall, the faint strains of carnival music drifting on the cold breeze. His rugged face was unreadable as Alara approached, her steps measured yet urgent. She laid out the plan with precision, careful not to reveal the full extent of her intentions, knowing well the detective's skepticism of her methods. "You are sure this will work?" Harker asked, his voice rough but tinged with a reluctant trust. "It has to," Alara replied, her piercing eyes meeting his. "The killer's fear will be their downfall. They can't resist the stage we're resetting." Preparations consumed the following days. Alara moved like a shadow through Veilshire, blending in among the masked crowds, planting whispers and carefully chosen clues that would provoke a reaction. The masks she chose to wear became more than mere disguise. They were armor against the creeping paranoia that threatened to suffocate her. Late at night, in the solitude of her room, she laid the masks out on her bed, the silver Venetian, the delicate feathered one from Mara, the black lace that framed her face just so. Candlelight flickered, casting elongated shadows that seemed to dance with the ghosts of secrets yet uncovered. Each mask told a story, a fragment of the town's fractured identity, and now they were tools in her desperate gambit. As the night of the carnival event arrived, the town square pulsed with life beneath a canopy of twinkling lights and swirling music. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of spiced wine and roasted chestnuts. Alara stood at the edge of the crowd, the chill wind tugging at her coat, heart pounding in time with the distant drum beats. Faces blurred behind layers of elaborate masks, each concealing a truth, a fear, or a lie. Her breath caught as she scanned the swirling sea of anonymity, knowing that somewhere within this festive masquerade lurked the answer she sought. The final act was about to begin, and Alara was more than ready to face whatever or whoever would step into the light. But as shadows lengthened and the crowd thickened, a sudden movement caught her eye, a figure slipping through the throng, their mask glinting in the lantern light. A shiver ran down her spine. This was the moment the plan would either shatter or succeed, and Alara braced herself for the inevitable collision of truth and deception. Her voice barely a whisper, she murmured to herself, "Tonight, the masks fall." The heavy velvet drapes parted with a soft rustle as I stepped to the grand ballroom of Valeshire's stately manor, the heart of the carnival town's most anticipated event, the annual masked ball. The air was thick with a heady mix of perfume, candle wax, and the faintest trace of something metallic, an undercurrent of something unspoken. Guests swirled around me like a living mosaic of color and mystery, each face hidden behind ornate masks that transformed strangers into enigmatic players in an elaborate performance. I adjusted the simple black mask perched over my eyes, feeling the cool satin against my skin. It was a small concession to the town's peculiar customs, a necessity to blend in without drawing undue attention. My dark hair was pulled back tightly, a practical choice, but even in the glamour of the event, I remained a careful observer, a journalist hunting for the truth behind the carnival's shimmering facade. Music floated through the air, a haunting waltz played by a small orchestra tucked beneath an arch of blooming jasmine. The rhythm was hypnotic, wrapping around the dancers as they moved in fluid circles, their laughter a delicate veneer over the palpable tension threading through the crowd. Valeshire's residents were masters of performance, each mask a crafted story, each smile a practiced gesture, but tonight, beneath the glitter and silk, something darker lurked. I drifted through the gathering, my senses sharpening. The silks and velvets brushed past me, the clinking of glasses punctuated by whispered conversations. I caught glimpses of eyes narrowed, darting, calculating behind the gilded masks. The town's secrets were everywhere, hidden in every glance and half-smile. Across the room, Victor Langley commanded attention without effort. His tall frame cut an imposing silhouette, the silver Venetian mask gleaming under the chandelier light like a blade. There was something magnetic, almost hypnotic, about him, a dangerous charm that made the hairs on my neck prick with unease. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt the weight of his silent scrutiny. The man was a master of masks in every sense, and I knew he would be pivotal in whatever was to come. As I moved closer, a sudden burst of applause drew my attention to the center of the ballroom. Lysandra Vale had begun her performance. Her feathered mask, shimmering with iridescent blues and greens, caught the candlelight as she glided across the floor. Her dance was mesmerizing, a story told through delicate, precise movements that held the room spellbound. The crowd's murmurs softened into silence, their eyes locked on her as she spun and dipped with effortless grace. I felt a sharp nudge in my side and turned to see Thomas Grieve, the local bartender, leaning in with a conspiratorial smile beneath his plain mask. His eyes flickered with knowledge, the kind of streetwise awareness that only years of listening could cultivate. "Watch your back tonight," he murmured, voice low but urgent. "Not everyone here wears just a mask on their face." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Valeshire was a town built on layers of deception, and tonight, those layers felt thinner, more fragile. I nodded, masking my apprehension with a practiced smile. The game had begun, and I was already in the middle of it. I spent the next hour weaving through groups of masked revelers, striking up conversations that danced along the edges of truth and lie. Valeshire's residents were cautious, their words measured, but beneath the surface, I sensed fractures, whispered grievances, veiled threats, and alliances forged in shadow. Every interaction was a puzzle piece, every glance a coded message. The music shifted to a slower, more somber tune, and the crowd's energy subtly changed. Laughter grew more tentative. Smiles flickered with uncertainty. I found a quiet alcove and pulled out my notebook, fingers trembling slightly as I jotted down impressions: Victor's cold charm, Lysandra's mesmerizing presence, Thomas's warning, the brittle veneer of the crowd's gaiety. A sudden clatter interrupted my thoughts. A masked man stumbled near the grand staircase, spilling his drink. The room tensed, eyes snapping toward the disturbance. I caught a glimpse of a pale face beneath a cracked mask, but before I could react, order was restored, and the moment passed like a shadow. Still, the unease lingered, wrapping around me like a second skin. This ball was more than spectacle. It was a stage set for secrets to unfold, and I was determined to be the one to unmask them all. As the night deepened, I found myself drawn back to Victor Langley's side, the crowd parting subtly as if he owned the very air around him. His voice was smooth, words carefully chosen, yet beneath the charm I detected a steely edge. "Journalist, isn't it?" he said, eyes glinting behind the silver mask. "Valeshire is not kind to those who pry too deeply." I met his gaze steadily. Perhaps some truths need the light. His smile was thin, almost a warning. "Be careful what you seek. Some masks are not meant to be lifted." The words echoed in my mind as I moved away, the music swelling again, the dance of shadows and secrets continuing around me. Tonight was only the beginning, and already I could feel the weight of Valeshire's hidden truths pressing down. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the dark road ahead. In a town where no one shows their real face, the greatest danger might be losing your own. And as the masked ball spun on, I knew one thing for certain: the night would not end as any of us expected. The shimmering chandeliers cast fractured light across the polished floor, each reflection a fragment of the many truths tangled within Valeshire's glittering heart. And I was ready to chase them all, no matter the cost. The grand hall of Valeshire's ancient opera house was transformed once again for the second masked ball, but this time the atmosphere carried a heavier weight. The chandeliers overhead cast fractured light across the sea of masks, the glittering jewels and feathers catching every glint, every flicker of movement. There was an uneasy energy beneath the surface of celebration, as if the very air refused to hold its breath any longer. I stood near the entrance, the familiar scrape of my black heels on the marble floor grounding me amid the swirl of silk and satin. My mask, a modest design of matte black with a subtle curve over the bridge of my nose, felt like both armor and prison. It hid my face, but it also reminded me how much I was still hiding, even from myself. My dark hair was pulled back tight, the only concession to vanity this time, practical and efficient. I needed to blend in, to become part of the performance, not the outsider scrutinizing it. The music began an eerie waltz that wound its way through the crowd like smoke, soft yet insistent. Couples spun under the chandeliers, their laughter tinkling like broken glass, fragile and sharp. I moved through them with measured steps, my eyes sharp beneath the mask, noting every flicker of unease, every whispered glance that darted away too quickly. Victor Langley was here, of course. His silver Venetian mask gleamed like a sliver of moonlight, impossibly polished. He was the embodiment of the town's seductive danger, his smile both inviting and predatory. I caught sight of him across the room, commanding attention without even trying. His presence was a shadow that stretched over the crowd, a reminder of the control he wielded and the secrets he buried beneath that polished veneer. As I navigated the crowd, I felt the weight of eyes, some curious, some hostile. The whispers had not stopped. The rumors that I was the murderer still clung to me like poison. But here, surrounded by the anonymity of masks, I had a chance to turn the tables. To use the chaos to my advantage. Mara Finch appeared beside me, her delicate feathered mask fluttering with her breath. Her eyes met mine, sharp and steady. "Be careful," she murmured, voice low enough that only I could hear. "He's watching." More closely than ever. I nodded, swallowing the lump of anxiety rising in my throat. Trust was a luxury I could ill afford. But Mara and Detective Harker were my fragile allies in this labyrinth of shadows. Detective Jonas Harker was not far off, his plain black mask barely disguising the skepticism etched into his rugged features. He moved with purpose, observing, calculating. Our uneasy partnership was still fragile, but tonight we were aligned by necessity. The dance of deception spun on, the masks concealing not only faces, but intentions, fears, and lies. I caught Lysandra Vale gliding through the crowd, her crimson costume aflame against the muted palette of black and silver. Our brief eye contact was charged with unspoken understanding. She held pieces of the puzzle, if I could coax them out. Every step I took was a delicate balance, gathering fragments of truth amidst the whirl of music and laughter, careful not to reveal too much of myself. The carnival's hum was a siren's song, seductive and dangerous. And beneath it all, the killer moved, hidden behind their mask, waiting for the moment to strike again. Then, in a quiet corner near the grand staircase, my hand brushed against something tucked beneath a velvet curtain, a small, folded note. Heart pounding, I slipped it into my pocket, the paper cool and crisp against my fingers. It was a clue, a thread I could pull. But it also meant I was closer than ever to the truth and closer to danger. The music swelled, the crowd's movements growing more fevered. I forced myself to breathe, to steady the trembling in my hands. This night was a performance, but also a battleground. And I was ready to unmask the darkness lurking beneath Valeshire's glittering facade. As I melted back into the crowd, the note burning like a secret promise in my pocket, I knew the game had changed. The killer was no longer just a shadow in the periphery. They were a presence I could no longer ignore. And I was no longer just a spectator. The night was far from over, and the masks would soon fall. The grand ballroom of Valeshire's carnival was a shimmering sea of colors and shadows, where every face was hidden behind a mask, and every glance carried a secret. The colossal chandelier hanging from the ornate ceiling scattered light in fractured patterns, casting prismatic reflections that danced over the swirling crowd. The scent of spiced wine mingled with the heavy perfume of the masked guests, while the haunting strains of a string quartet wove a melody that felt both elegant and ominous. Tonight was not just a celebration. It was the stage for a revelation that would shatter the delicate illusions that cloaked this town. Alara Miles stood just beyond the edge of the throng, her black mask a simple contrast to the elaborate disguises around her. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, her piercing eyes scanning the crowd beneath the dim glow. The weight of what she was about to do settled in her chest like a stone. She had followed twisted threads of deception, uncovered whispers buried beneath layers of performance, and now, in this moment, she would pull back the final mask. Mara Finch, standing close by with her delicate feathered mask fluttering with each cautious breath, gave Alara a steadying nod. Detective Jonas Harker remained near the periphery, his rugged face unmasked, eyes sharp and unreadable. Lysandra Vale lingered in the shadows, her vivid red mask gleaming, her sharp tongue silenced for once by the gravity of the scene unfolding. Taking a deep breath, Alara stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering as she cut through the murmured conversations. "Victor Langley," she called, the name ringing like a bell in the charged silence. Heads turned, masked eyes locked onto her, wide with shock. "You stand accused not just by me, but by the evidence that can no longer be hidden behind your silver mask." A ripple of gasps swept through the crowd. The grand music faltered, the quartet's notes hanging suspended in the tense air. Victor Langley emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing in his black cloak. His signature silver Venetian mask caught the candlelight, gleaming with cold menace. For a moment, his usual composed charm flickered, replaced by an almost human fear. "You have no proof." Victor's voice was low, a dangerous whisper that barely reached beyond those closest to him. Yet the tremor in his tone betrayed him, as if the walls of his carefully constructed world were cracking. Elara held up a small, worn diary, the key piece of evidence she had uncovered. "This diary reveals your manipulations, your betrayals born from vanity and fear. The victim was silenced because they knew too much, because they threatened your control." The crowd shifted uneasily. The masks felt heavier now, as if the weight of truth was pressing down on each concealed face. Victor's loyal followers in the elite tried to shield him, but the spell was broken. He was no longer the untouchable figure behind the silver mask. He was exposed. Suddenly, Victor lunged forward, his cloak billowing like a dark shadow, but Elara was prepared. Mara stepped between them, her feathered mask a blur as she deflected Victor's aggressive move. Detective Harker moved swiftly, his unmasked presence commanding authority as he restrained Victor. The ballroom erupted in a mixture of gasps, murmurs, and hurried whispers. The unmasking was complete not just literally, but metaphorically. Veilshire's glittering facade fractured, revealing the tangled web of deceit that had ensnared them all. Outside, the cold night air was a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. The crowd spilled out, some murmuring in disbelief, others whispering accusations. Mara's steady hand found Elara's shoulder once more, grounding her amid the swirling chaos. Detective Harker approached, his face shadowed in the moonlight. "You did it," he said quietly, a note of reluctant respect in his voice. "But this is just the beginning." Elara nodded, the anxiety still gnawing at her resolve. The killer was caught, but the cost was high. Veilshire's masks might still cling to their faces, but the truth had pierced their shimmering veil. And Elara knew this night would change everything, not just for the town, but for herself. As the first light of dawn began to touch the carnival town, Elara's eyes lifted to the horizon. The masks would remain, but so would the scars and the promise of a new, unmasked reality. The race to uncover truth was far from over, but for now, she had won a pivotal battle in the shadowed dance of Veilshire. Her voice, steady now, whispered into the lingering night, "The truth is out. But who's brave enough to face what comes next?" The carnival's lingering echoes faded as the story of Veilshire's darkest night was finally told unmasked, raw, and irrevocable. The morning after the revelation felt surreal, as though the town itself was holding its breath, waiting to exhale the tension that had gripped every masked face for weeks. Veilshire, a place where identity was cloaked in artistry and secrecy, now stood starkly exposed in the harsh light of truth. I awoke in my small rented room above the weathered streets, the distant murmur of the carnival's remnants echoing faintly like a ghostly refrain. The weight of the past days settled heavily on my chest, a mixture of relief and exhaustion tangled with the unshackable residue of fear. The nightmare was over, or so I hoped, but the scars it left were anything but invisible. Downstairs, the town square was beginning to stir, the usual cacophony, subdued as if the residents were still processing the seismic shift in their community. The news had spread swiftly. Victor Langley, the charismatic figure who had loomed over Veilshire like a silver spectre, was unmasked as the murderer. His carefully constructed empire of manipulation and fear lay in ruins, yet the question lingered: how many others had worn masks darker than their own? Detective Jonas Harker was already at work, corralling the remaining threads of evidence and testimonies into a coherent narrative. I found him in the town hall, his rugged features drawn tight with fatigue but his eyes clear and focused. When he looked up and nodded at me, there was an unspoken acknowledgement not just of the truth uncovered, but of the journey we'd endured together. "This town owes you a debt," he said quietly, "though I know that doesn't erase the doubt or the danger you faced." I managed a tired smile. Justice isn't a neat package, detective. It's messy, and it's never over the moment the killer is caught. Outside, The carnival's once vibrant banners hung limp and faded, their colors muted under the gray sky. The silver mask that had symbolized Victor's dominion lay discarded near the gates, a hollow shell of the man who had wielded it like a weapon. Its gleam was dulled now, a stark reminder that beneath every mask lies a story waiting to be told or a truth desperate to remain hidden. Later that afternoon, I sought refuge in Mara Finch's antique shop, the quiet sanctuary where time seemed to slow, and secrets were whispered among relics of a forgotten carnival era. Mara greeted me with a knowing look, her delicate feathered mask tilted slightly as if inviting me to drop mine, even if just for a moment. She poured steaming tea into chipped porcelain cups, the scent of chamomile and cinnamon filling the small room. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to mimic the masks we all wore, not just the physical ones, but those forged from fear, vanity, and the desperate need to belong. "You did what you had to," Mara said softly, her voice a balm and a challenge. "But Veilshire will never be the same, and neither will you." I nodded, the truth settling deep. The journey to uncover the killer had peeled back layers of the town's glittering facade and my own carefully guarded defenses. I had stared into the abyss of my fears and doubts, and while I emerged victorious, the reflection that met me was forever altered. Even as the town began to heal, I knew the masks would remain. Veilshire's charm was inseparable from its shadows, and its people would continue to navigate that delicate balance. As for me, departure was inevitable. The city lights and familiar streets of my past beckoned, but I would carry the lessons of Veilshire with me, a reminder that truth is a double-edged sword, and identity is a fragile construct, forever shaped by the masks we choose to wear. As dusk fell, I took one last walk through the empty carnival grounds. The wind whispered through the faded tents and broken rides, a mournful melody that echoed the town's fractured soul. My footsteps crunched softly on the gravel, a steady rhythm anchoring me in the moment. I paused by the abandoned mask, its silver surface catching the last glimmers of daylight. Reaching down, I picked it up, feeling the cold weight in my hands. It was a symbol of all that had been lost and all that might still be reclaimed. With a deep breath, I slipped the mask into my bag, not as a trophy, but as a keepsake of a place where truth and deception danced an endless waltz, and where I had learned that sometimes the bravest act is simply to keep looking, unmasked and unyielding. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while I felt ready to face it. Veilshire's shadows would always be a part of me, but they would no longer define me. The mask was off, and my story was far from over. The chill of the night wrapped around me like an invisible cloak as I stepped out onto the balcony, the carnival lights flickering below in a restless sea of color and shadow. The town of Veilshire was alive with the hum of distant laughter and faint strains of music, a haunting soundtrack to a place where no one ever revealed their true face. I pulled my coat tighter, the fabric rough against my skin, and stared out over the masked crowd, each figure a mystery wrapped in ornate disguise. For weeks I had walked these streets, peered behind more masks than I could count, and yet the truth remained elusive. Faces hidden, secrets buried deep beneath layers of silk, feathers, and paint. I thought I understood performance, had lived it through my work, but here, it was more than a facade. It was the very essence of existence. The weight of my own mask suddenly felt heavier, its intricate design a reminder not just of the town's customs, but of my own fears and vanity. Who was I beneath this carefully constructed image? Was I the relentless journalist chasing shadows, or the woman haunted by doubts, vulnerable to the same deceptions that clouded Veilshire? The question gnawed at me, unsettling as the cold wind that whispered past my ears. I retreated inside, seeking the warmth and quiet refuge of Mara Finch's antique shop. The scent of aged wood and old paper greeted me, grounding me in a world where memories clung to every surface. Mara was there, as always, a small figure draped in shadows and feathers, her delicate mask catching the light with a soft shimmer. She looked up as I entered, eyes sharp and knowing. "You look like you carrying the weight of the world," she said, voice low and steady. I nodded, my fingers trailing over a feathered mask resting on the counter. "It's more than just the case, Mara. It's this whole town. The masks, they're not just for hiding, are they?" She smiled faintly, a secret smile that seemed to bridge centuries. "No, they're for becoming. In Valeshire, a mask is a story, a promise, a prison. Some wear them to protect, others to imprison themselves." Her words settled around me like a soft cloak. I thought of Victor Langley, his silver mask gleaming with charm and menace, the dangerous allure of vanity and power. I thought of Mara, her cautious loyalty wrapped in layers of mystery. I thought of Detective Harker, rugged and unmasked, struggling to navigate a world where truth was tangled in shadows. Later, in a dimly lit cafe, I met with Jonas. The air was thick with tension, the clink of coffee cups punctuating our cautious dialogue. We spoke in hushed tones about trust and betrayal, about the elusive nature of truth in a town built on illusion. "You realize," he said, eyes narrowed, "that in Valeshire, truth is as much a mask as any other. Sometimes, the hardest part is knowing which mask to trust." I met his gaze, the weight of suspicion and alliance pressing between us. "And sometimes," I whispered, "the hardest part is facing the mask we wear ourselves." Returning to my room, I stood before the cracked mirror, the fractured reflection staring back at me like a fragmented puzzle. Slowly, I lifted my mask and set it down, the cool wood and ornate paint suddenly foreign in my hands. The face beneath was tired, vulnerable, but not broken. I traced the lines of my reflection, the insecurities and scars that no mask could hide. In that moment, a quiet resolve blossomed. I would carry the truth of Valeshire with me, unmasked and unafraid. The masks would remain, how could they not? But I would no longer be prisoner to the lies they concealed. As dawn crept over the horizon, the carnival town stirred once more, its facades glittering in the pale light. I breathed deeply, the air crisp and clean, and prepared to step back into the dance of shadows and light. The performance was far from over, but now I was ready to face the stage with open eyes and a steady heart. The masks beneath which we all hid were many, but so too were the truths waiting to be uncovered. And I would find them, no matter the cost. Yet, as I turned away from the mirror, a whisper lingered in the silence. In Valeshire, every truth revealed only birthed another mask to wear. The question remained how long before the line between self and disguise finally vanished. The answer, I feared, lay just beyond the fragile veil of dawn. The morning air was thick with a mist that seemed to cling to the very bones of Valeshire, blurring the edges of the town like a watercolor slowly bleeding beyond its frame. Standing on the train platform, I watched the carnival town fade into the grey light of dawn, its twisted spires and flickering lanterns dissolving into the fog. Behind me, the soft shuffle of masked figures moving silently through the streets was a haunting reminder that even with the killer unmasked, the masks themselves remained silent witnesses to the town's eternal performance. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the fabric rough against my skin, grounding me in the cold reality of departure. My eyes lingered on the silhouette of Victor Langley, a phantom among shadows, his silver Venetian mask still glinting with the same unsettling charisma that had sent ripples through every step of this investigation. Though he was behind bars, or so the town claimed, his presence felt like a ghost at the edges of my vision, a reminder that some masks do not shatter so easily. Inside the dim, cluttered antique shop where Mara Finch had sheltered me from the storm of suspicion and fear, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and varnished wood. Mara's delicate feather mask lay on the table between us, a fragile emblem of the secret she carried. We spoke in hushed tones, our voices barely above the whisper of the wind outside, sharing the weight of unspoken truths. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw not just a confidant but a kindred spirit bound by the invisible threads of past wounds and guarded hopes. Mara's loyalty had been my anchor in this sea of deception, and her revelations about Veilshire's fractured soul had peeled back layers of illusion I never knew I was living beneath. Yet as much as I wanted to stay and unravel the town's mysteries, the truth was clear: some stories demand distance, a severing of ties to reclaim oneself. Detective Jonas Harker lingered in the shadows beyond the carnival's fading glow, his rugged face unmasked and etched with the wariness of a man caught between two worlds. His eyes, sharp and wary, scanned the crowd as Veilshire's residents resumed their ritualistic dance of concealment. The silver mask of Victor Langley flashed briefly in the crowd, a stark symbol of the fragile power that vanity and fear wielded here. Harker's presence was a reminder that law and order had their place, but in Veilshire, justice was a mirror fractured by reflection and distortion. I wondered if he, too, could ever truly understand the town's pulse, or if he was forever an outsider peering through a glass darkly. Later, alone in my rented room, I faced a cracked carnival mirror hanging crooked on the wall. My reflection stared back, half hidden by a mask I no longer wore, the other half revealing eyes that had seen too much and yet not enough. I traced the jagged lines where the glass had fractured, seeing in them a metaphor for my journey, shattered illusions, fragmented truths, and the painful process of piecing oneself back together. The masks of Veilshire were more than mere disguises. They were the town's soul etched in porcelain and paint, a complex tapestry woven from threads of vanity, fear, and desperate yearning for control. I had come seeking a story, a scoop, a redemption from past failures. Instead, I found a mirror reflecting my own hidden fears and the delicate facades we all construct to navigate the world. As the train's whistle pierced the morning stillness, I stepped aboard, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks a steady pulse beneath my thoughts. The town's silhouette receded, but the weight of its secrets settled deep within me, a permanent mark etched beneath the surface. Could I leave Veilshire behind, truly? Or would the masks I'd uncovered, the truths I'd unearthed, forever shape the contours of my identity? The answer was as elusive as the town itself, wrapped in shadow, hidden behind the flicker of candlelight and the turn of a masked dance. And yet, for the first time in a long while, I felt a cautious hope stirring beneath the melancholy, a fragile ember against the darkness. The story was over, but the journey was just beginning. I closed my eyes, letting the memory of Veilshire's enduring facade settle within me, a silent vow to carry its lessons forward, wherever the road might lead. The carnival town faded, but its masks, like the truths they concealed, would never truly disappear. And neither would I. The grand hall of Veilshire's grandest manor was a kaleidoscope of glitter and shadow, every corner alive with swirling silk, shimmering masks, and the low murmur of whispered secrets. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, casting fractured light that danced across the faces of the guests, none of whom dared reveal more than their carefully crafted facades. I stepped cautiously through the torrent of masked revelers, my senses alert to every flicker of movement and every whispered exchange. The air was thick with perfume and the uneasy tension of concealed truths. It was the perfect setting for a story, and I was determined to uncover every hidden layer. As I navigated past a group of dancers twirling in perfect synchrony, the haunting melody of the string quartet filled the room, its lilting notes weaving through the chatter. Laughter bubbled up here and there, fragile and forced. It was as if the entire town were performing an elaborate play, each of us actors bound by invisible scripts and unspoken rules. I felt the weight of their silence pressing in, the way eyes flickered behind masks with something darker than amusement. Suddenly, a sharp, chilling scream cut through the music, halting the whirl of movement like a sudden gust extinguishing a flame. Heads snapped toward the source, a narrow corridor leading away from the main ballroom. The crowd parted in a ripple of shocked murmurs as I moved toward the sound, curiosity and dread mingling in my chest. The corridor was dim, lit only by flickering sconces casting long shadows that stretched like fingers along the walls. At the far end, the polished marble floor gleamed ominously beneath my feet. Then there, a figure lay sprawled near the base of the grand staircase. The ornate mask that once adorned the face was cracked, revealing pale skin slick with blood. Time seemed to slow as the realization sank in the prominent town councillor was dead. A hushed gasp rose from the crowd as they gathered, faces masked but eyes wide with horror. I stepped closer, my journalistic instincts overriding the shock. The victim's identity was unmistakable despite the mask's ruin. Jonathan Merrick, a man whose influence in Valeshire was as palpable as the heavy scent of roses that clung to the room. Before I could process the scene, a firm hand gripped my arm. Detective Jonas Harker emerged from the crowd, his rugged face stern beneath a furrowed brow. His gaze pinned me like a hawk spotting prey. "Stay where you are," he commanded quietly but with unmistakable authority. "You were seen near the body." A wave of unease surged through me. I knew what that meant. Being close to the victim made me a suspect. The ballroom had transformed. The infectious energy of celebration drained away, replaced by an oppressive atmosphere of suspicion and fear. Murmurs escalated into whispered accusations as masked guests darted wary glances my way. I could feel the weight of their judgment, the invisible chains tightening. "Alara, please," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. I was only here to report to witness. But my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The masks hid faces, but not the sharpness of their suspicion. Detective Harker's eyes flicked toward the victim once more before he motioned for officers to secure the scene. "We'll need your full cooperation," he said, voice low but unyielding. As I was led away from the crowd, the echo of the string quartet returned, its mournful notes now a sinister backdrop to the unraveling nightmare. I realized with a sinking heart that my arrival in Valeshire had brought me into a web far darker than I had anticipated. The masks around me were not just for show, they were shields, weapons, and prison bars, and I was trapped behind one of my own. The first whispers of doubt had taken root, and the game had changed. I was no longer a spectator but a player, forced to navigate the dangerous dance of deceit and fear. Somewhere in this glittering facade lay the truth if I could find it before the town's suspicion consumed me entirely. The air in Valeshire was thick with a heavy stillness, a quiet that pressed down on me like a physical weight. The cheerful clamor of the carnival had all but vanished, replaced by a tense hush that rippled through the masked crowd. I stood near the edge of the town square, the ornate lanterns casting long, wavering shadows over the cobblestones. Every face around me was hidden behind an intricate mask. Venetian swirls, gilded edges, feathers and jewels, but the eyes spoke volumes. They were sharp, watchful, and filled with suspicion. I felt their gaze like 1,000 needles pricking my skin. I tried to steady my breath, to convince myself I wasn't the villain here. Yet, as the murmurs swelled and eyes flicked in my direction, doubt gnawed at the edges of my resolve. The victim, one of Valeshire's prominent figures, had been found lifeless during the masked ball, and I had been close by when it happened. It was a cruel twist of fate that the journalist sent to uncover the truth was now the subject of suspicion. Detective Jonas Harker arrived with the quiet authority of a man used to command but unfamiliar with the peculiar etiquette of Valeshire. His rugged appearance and plain clothes set him apart in a town of masquerades, where concealment was the norm. He didn't wear a mask, and for a moment, that raw honesty in his unhidden face unsettled me more than the veiled glances of the townsfolk. "Alara Miles," he began, his voice low but steady, "I need to ask you some questions about the night of the murder." I nodded, bracing myself, of course. "I'll help however I can." The interrogation room was cramped and cluttered, smelling faintly of damp wood and stale smoke. A single bare bulb swung overhead, casting stark shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Outside, the distant strains of carnival music drifted in a haunting reminder that life outside these walls continued, oblivious to the darkness that had fallen within. Harker's eyes never wavered as he paced slowly, folding his arms. "You were near the victim when the body was discovered. Can you tell me exactly what you saw?" I recounted the evening as clearly as I could, describing the laughter, the masks, the sudden scream that shattered the festive air. But each word I spoke seemed to deepen the detective's furrowed brow. "And did you notice anyone acting suspiciously? Anyone who might have had a motive?" I hesitated. There were tensions beneath the surface, yes. Vailshire isn't as carefree as it looks. But no clear suspect came to mind. Harker's gaze held mine. "You understand that being here so close to the scene makes you a person of interest." The implication hung heavy in the air. I was no longer just a visitor. I was a suspect. Later, I found myself at Thomas Greaves' tavern, seeking refuge in the dim light and the familiar murmur of whispered conversations. Thomas wiped down the bar with a rag, his eyes sharp and calculating beneath his subtle mask. He didn't welcome me with words, but the guarded glance he gave me said enough. Rumors swirled like smoke that I was meddling where I shouldn't, that the murder was a message, and I was the target. "People talk," Thomas said finally, voice low. "Vailshire doesn't take kindly to outsiders poking around, especially when blood's been spilled. Be careful, Alara," I nodded, the warning sinking in. The carnival's glittering facade was cracking, revealing a town steeped in fear and secrecy. I was caught in the eye of a storm, and every step I took could draw me closer to the truth or to ruin. That night, alone in my modest lodgings, I stared at my reflection. The cracked mirror fragmented my face into shards, each one masked by shadows. I felt stripped bare beneath my own skin, more exposed than any mask could hide me. The town's suspicion was a poison seeping into my thoughts, breeding paranoia and self-doubt. Yet beneath the fear, a fierce determination burned. I would not be broken. Not here, not like this. Tomorrow I would face the town again. I would face Detective Harker's relentless questions and the silent judgment of Vailshire's masked citizens. And I would keep digging, because somewhere beneath the masks lay the truth, and I intended to find it, no matter the cost. But as I drifted into a restless sleep, the question lingered: how long before the town's suspicion became a verdict? And I was condemned before I could even prove my innocence. The game was on, and the stakes were higher than I could have imagined. The streets of Vailshire wore their masks with more than just the ornate decorations that covered their faces. They wore them like a second skin, a barrier between truth and performance. As I stepped deeper into the carnival town's tangled web of mystery, I realized that the masks weren't only physical. They were symbolic of the secrets everyone desperately tried to keep hidden. Tonight, I would begin peeling back some of those layers, starting with those who moved closest to the shadows of that fateful night. My first stop was the local tavern, a dimly lit refuge tucked between the kaleidoscope of carnival tents and flickering lanterns. The scent of spilt ale and aged wood enveloped me as I pushed through the heavy door. Inside, the murmur of hushed conversations blended with the occasional clink of glasses. I scanned the room, eyes adjusting to the low light, searching for the one person who might offer more than the usual guarded words: Thomas Greaves. The bartender with a reputation for knowing more than he let on. He stood behind the counter, a sturdy figure with a face weathered by years of listening and watching. His black mask was simple, almost austere, but his eyes gleamed with a sharpness that betrayed the calm demeanor he projected. I approached cautiously, pulling up a stool and catching his attention with a subtle nod. "Alara Miles," I introduced myself, careful not to sound too eager. "I'm covering the ball and, well, the murder. I was hoping you might share what you know." Thomas studied me for a moment, then leaned in, voice dropping to a near whisper. "This town doesn't like strangers poking around, especially ones asking too many questions. But you're already in the thick of it, so I suppose it's too late to back out now." His tone was a mix of warning and reluctant cooperation. The victim, he wasn't liked by everyone. There were whispers, debts owed, promises broken. But no one expected murder. I pressed for details, noting every hesitation, every glance cast over his shoulder. Thomas spoke of late-night meetings, secretive exchanges, and a growing unease among the town's elite. Yet, he was careful not to name names outright, weaving his words like a tapestry of half-truths. Leaving the tavern, I felt the weight of those veiled warnings settle in my chest. Each masked face I passed seemed to watch me with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. The carnival's festive lights flickered overhead, but beneath their glow, the town's shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker. Next, I sought out Lysandra Vale, the carnival's enigmatic performer, whose dances were as captivating as the mystery she guarded. I found her backstage in a cramped dressing room, surrounded by racks of elaborate costumes and the scent of grease paint lingering thick in the air. She moved with a practiced grace, her feathered mask catching the light as she rehearsed, but her eyes were sharp, alert. "Elara," she greeted me, her voice cool but not unkind. "I hear you re-stirring up trouble." I smiled, acknowledging the truth in her words. "Only trying to understand what's really happening here." Her gaze flickered, and for a moment the mask seemed to slip, revealing a flicker of something more vulnerable beneath. Valeshire's a place where everyone plays a part. Masks aren't just for the ball. They refer every day. You want to know who killed him. Look beyond the dance, beyond the smiles. People hide behind their vanity and their fears. She offered no more, leaving me with an unsettling sense that she was both a guide and a gatekeeper to the town's darkest corners. As I left the dressing room, the echoes of her words lingered. The masks weren't just hiding faces, they were hiding truths. And in Valeshire, those truths were dangerous. Night deepened, and the carnival's lights blurred into a kaleidoscope of color and shadow. I moved through the streets, watching, listening, piecing together fragments of conversations and stolen glances. Each encounter added a thread to the complex tapestry of deception I was unraveling. I found myself questioning everything, the smiles that never reached the eyes, the laughter that seemed forced, the silences that spoke volumes. The victims' relationships were tangled in a web of jealousy, ambition, and old grievances. Every person I met was both a potential ally and a possible threat. As the chapter of this night closed, I was left with a chilling realization. In Valeshire, the masks we wear are as much about protecting ourselves from others as they are about hiding from ourselves. And the deeper I delved, the more I feared what I might find beneath my own. But there was no turning back. The truth was out there, buried beneath layers of vanity and fear, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to unmask it. And I was determined that someone would be me. I could feel the eyes of the town on me even as I disappeared into the swirling mists that crept along the carnival's edges. Somewhere in the shadows, the killer watched, waiting for the next move. And so was I. The bell above the door jingled faintly as I stepped into the cramped, dimly lit space of Mara Finch's antique shop. The air was thick with the musky scent of old paper, varnished wood, and something else I couldn't quite place, a lingering trace of faded dreams or forgotten whispers. The shelves groaned beneath the weight of carnival memorabilia, tarnished masks with peeling paint, delicate glass figurines shaped like jesters, yellowed posters from long-past festivals, and dusty volumes whose cracked spines spoke of history's best left undisturbed. At the back of the shop, illuminated only by a flickering oil lamp, stood Mara Finch, small and sharp-featured. Draped in a thin shawl that did little to hide the tension coiled beneath. Her mask, a delicate creation of feathers dyed in muted greens and browns, obscured her expression but not the wary glint in her eyes. She studied me with the kind of cautious calculation I'd come to expect in Valeshire, a town where faces were never truly seen. "You came," she said, voice low and steady, as if admitting this was a risk for both of us. "I did," I replied, careful to keep my tone neutral. "I need to understand what's really going on here." Mara hesitated, then gestured toward a battered armchair by the fireplace. I sank into it, the leather creaking under my weight. She moved to a nearby table cluttered with trinkets and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound book. Its cover was cracked and worn, embossed with strange symbols that hinted at secret meanings. "This," she said, placing it gently before me, "is a fragment of Valeshire's hidden history, the stories they don't want outsiders to know." I thumbed through the fragile pages, each one yellowed with age and filled with faded ink. There were accounts of shadowy gatherings, whispered alliances, and dark bargains made beneath the carnival's glittering surface. Mara's voice wove the narrative as she spoke, threading through tales of vanity and fear, of power wielded behind masks, both literal and metaphorical. "The masks are more than tradition," Mara confided. "They're tools of control. They hide truths, yes, but they also protect lies. The town's elite keep the rest of us dancing on strings we can't see." A sudden creak echoed from the floorboards outside. Mara's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing beneath the feathers. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The shop, already tight and cluttered, seemed to shrink further, the shadows growing longer in the flickering light. "We don't have much time," Mara whispered. "Trust is a dangerous thing here, Alara. You will find few who wear their loyalty as openly as their masks." I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me like a shroud. Before I left, Mara pressed something cold and wooden into my palm, a small mask, intricately carved with swirling patterns that felt oddly familiar. "Keep this," she said softly. "It's a reminder. Not everyone who hides behind a mask is your enemy, but not all friends reveal their faces." Outside, the carnival lights flickered through the dusty window pane, their colors fractured and distorted by the grime. The music from the distant fairground floated in, a haunting melody that seemed both a promise and a warning. I slipped the wooden mask into my pocket, feeling its smooth edges press against my skin. In Valeshire, every secret was a performance and every mask a weapon. But now, with Mara's cautious alliance, I had a weapon of my own. The path ahead was riddled with shadows, and I was more determined than ever to unmask the truth, no matter what it cost me. As I stepped back onto the crooked streets, the carnival's eerie glow casting fractured reflections on the wet cobblestones, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching from every shadow. Valeshire was a town built on secrets, and I was just beginning to scratch the surface. But with Mara's warnings echoing in my mind, I knew one thing for certain: trust no one, question everything, and never let your own mask slip, not even for a moment. The game was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. And somewhere beneath the swirling colors and laughter, danger waited, patient, silent, and deadly. The tavern was a hushed refuge from the swirling chaos of Valeshire's streets, its low ceiling and worn wooden beams pressed close like a secret waiting to be shared. Alara pushed open the heavy door, the faint aroma of spilled ale and smoke greeting her with an oddly comforting familiarity. She found Detective Jonas Harker already seated at a corner table, the flicker of a solitary candle casting sharp edges across his rugged face. Jonas looked up as she approached, his eyes narrowing slightly beneath thick brows. He said nothing, motioning to the empty chair across from him. Alara sat, her heart tightening despite the calm she tried to project. They were two strangers bound by circumstance and suspicion, each aware that trust was a currency neither could afford lightly. "I didn't expect you to show," Jonas said finally, voice low and measured. "Neither did I," Alara replied, folding her hands on the table. "But if we were going to get anywhere, we need to pool what we know." He grunted, leaning forward to push a collection of photographs across the table, images of the victim, the crime scene, and several masked individuals captured in fleeting moments. Alara studied them, noting the subtle details Jonas highlighted: a smudge on the victim's cuff, a faint scent of something metallic lingering in the air. "Valeshire's masks aren't just for show," Jonas said. "They hide more than faces. They hide motives, lies, and fear." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle uneasily over her. She had sensed it all along the performance, the layers of deception, but hearing it confirmed in his steady voice brought a new dimension to the mystery. They exchanged theories cautiously. Alara shared her interviews with Lysandra Vale and Thomas Grieve, recounting whispered rumors and half-truths. Jonas responded with procedural insights and forensic findings that complicated the narrative she'd begun to piece together. Neither fully trusted the other, and yet a grudging respect began to form amid the tension. At one point, a sudden noise from the tavern's entrance startled them both. Alara's pulse quickened as footsteps approached, the faint scrape of boots on stone making her eyes dart to the door. Jonas's hand hovered near his jacket pocket, a subtle gesture of readiness. The moment passed without incident, and the two returned to their exchange, voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers. They debated the significance of a torn fragment of the victim's mask, the peculiar timing of certain events, and the elusive figure of Victor Langley, who loomed like a shadow over every lead. As the meeting drew to a close, Jonas folded the photographs and tucked them into his coat. "This isn't over," he said, "and neither is the danger." Alara stood, the chill of the night air striking her as she stepped outside. The distant strains of carnival music floated like a ghostly backdrop against the darkened streets. She looked back once at the tavern's doorway, then forward to the uncertain path ahead. Uneasy alliances had never felt so fragile or so necessary. In Valeshire, every mask hid a story, and every story threatened to unravel the thin thread holding reality together. Alara steeled herself for what was to come, aware that trust might be the most dangerous mask of all. Her mind raced with questions. Could she rely on Jonas, despite his reservations? Was the detective a true ally or another piece in Valeshire's intricate game of shadows? And as the carnival lights flickered in the distance, was she prepared to confront the truths that lay beneath? The night deepened, and with it, the mystery. The line between friend and foe blurred as Alara stepped back into the maze of masks, her determination unshaken but her heart burdened by doubt. The uneasy alliance had begun, but its end was nowhere in sight. The carnival town whispered its secrets, and Alara listened, ready to unmask the lies no matter the cost. The dance between performance and reality continued, and she was caught in its rhythm, a reluctant partner in a deadly masquerade. As she vanished into the shadows, the question hung in the air like a whispered threat. In Valeshire, who could truly be trusted when all wore masks? The answer, Alara knew, would come only when the last mask fell. The antique shop was a refuge of shadows and whispers, a place where the past clung to every surface like the thick layer of dust on the old carnival memorabilia that crowded every shelf. Alara stepped inside, the bell above the door tinkling softly to announce her arrival. Mara Finch looked up from behind the counter, her sharp eyes flickering with cautious welcome beneath the delicate feathered mask she always wore. "You found something." Mara's voice was low, almost conspiratorial. Alara nodded, her hands cradling a small, leather-bound book she had uncovered in the back room, a diary, its worn cover cracked with age and care. "I found it hidden behind a false panel in one of the cabinets. It belonged to the victim." Mara's expression tightened, the usual calm replaced by a flicker of unease. "That diary has been trouble before. It contains truths some in Valeshire would rather keep buried." Alara settled into a creaky wooden chair by the window, the fading light casting the shop in a sepia tone. She opened the diary carefully, the pages brittle but intact, and began to read. The handwriting was meticulous, each entry a thread weaving a tapestry of secrets. The victim, a prominent figure in Valeshire's masked society, had chronicled clandestine meetings held in shadowed corners of the carnival grounds. Alara's eyes darted across the pages, noting names, dates, and cryptic references to power struggles and whispered threats. One passage caught her breath, a description of a meeting with Victor Langley, the town's silver-masked enigma. The victim had written of Langley's charm, a mask within a mask, and the dangerous games he played to maintain control over Valeshire's fragile order. He smiles like the devil, the entry read, but his eyes are hungry, always watching, always calculating. The air in the shop seemed to thicken as Alara read on, each page peeling back the layers of deception that cloaked Veilshire. The diary hinted at blackmail, secret alliances, and betrayals that ran deeper than anyone had guessed. It was a map of the town's darkest corners, illuminated by the victim's desperate need to expose the truth. Mara watched quietly, the flicker of candlelight catching the edges of her feathered mask. "You must be careful," she warned. "Langley doesn't forgive those who dig too deep." Alara nodded, the weight of the diary pressing against her like a physical burden. Suddenly, the distant carnival music seemed distant and hollow, replaced by a silence that wrapped around the shop like a shroud. Outside, the streets of Veilshire pulsed with masked revelers, their faces hidden but their intentions as enigmatic as the night itself. Alara glanced toward the window, her senses alert to every shadow, every whisper carried on the cool breeze. This diary was more than a collection of secrets. It was a key that could unlock the truth behind the murder and possibly save her from the growing suspicion that threatened to consume her. But with that key came danger. Victor Langley was watching, and somewhere in the glittering crowds, the next move was already being made. Alara closed the diary, her mind racing. The game had changed. Now, she wasn't just uncovering secrets, she was part of the story. The chapter closed on her resolve hardening like steel beneath the mask she wore, not just the physical one Veilshire demanded, but the one she was building around her own fractured identity. The hunt for truth would not be easy, and the shadows only grew darker with every revelation. As the candle flickered low, Alara's eyes met Mara's, silently acknowledging the peril ahead. The diary was a beacon in the night, but it also painted a target squarely on her back. The chill of the evening seeped into the parlor of the sprawling Veilshire mansion as I crossed the threshold, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs that swallowed the echoes of my approach. The room was a shrine to the carnival's past. Aged masks hung from gilded frames, faded posters of performers long gone, and shelves cluttered with curiosities that whispered of forgotten revelries. Candlelight flickered unevenly, casting long, wavering shadows that danced across the ornate wallpaper, warping the faces of painted comedians and tragedians alike. From the gloom, a figure emerged, tall, statuesque, and impossibly poised. Victor Langley. His presence was a paradox of elegance and menace, his silver Venetian mask catching the light just so, reflecting a cold glint that made his charisma seem almost otherworldly. There was a magnetic pull to him, the kind that drew you in but warned you to keep your guard raised. Miles, he began, his voice a smooth, cultivated purr that held an undercurrent of steel. Veilshire is a place of many faces, yet few truths. I trust your visit has been enlightening. His words hung in the air, loaded with implication, as if each syllable was a carefully placed piece on an invisible chessboard. I met his gaze, or rather the empty eyes behind the mask, and forced a steady breath. Enlightening enough to know that secrets run deeper here than I expected, I replied, keeping my tone even despite the prickling sensation crawling up my spine. And that some people will go to great lengths to keep them buried. A flicker of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach those cold, scrutinizing eyes. Indeed. But in a town like Veilshire, control is everything, and control, Miles, is not so easily surrendered. He stepped closer, the faint scent of expensive cologne mingling with the musty air. And I caught the subtle tightening of his gloved hand, a gesture so slight it could have been dismissed, but not by me. Years of chasing stories had trained me to read between the lines, to catch the tremor beneath the surface. Why are you so invested in this investigation? I dared to ask, my voice barely more than a whisper. What is it about the victim that threatens you? Victor's gaze sharpened, and for a moment, the charismatic mask slipped, revealing a flicker of something darker: fear, anger. Both. Threats come in many forms, he said cryptically. But beware, Ms. Miles, sometimes the seeker becomes the hunted. The word sent a shiver down my spine, but I refused to show it. "I'm not so easily deterred," I said, stepping back to put distance between us. "The truth will come out one way or another." Victor inclined his head, a gesture both respectful and warning. "Very well. But remember, in Valeshire, the mask you wear may protect you, or it may be your undoing." Before I could respond, he turned gracefully on his heel, the silver mask catching the candlelight one last time before he disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone with the ghosts of the carnival's secrets. The faint strains of carnival music drifted through the open window, a haunting melody that seemed to mock the fragile peace of the night. I stood there, heart pounding, the weight of his words settling heavily on my shoulders. Victor Langley was more than just a suspect or a player in this deadly game. He was a master of the masks we all wore, and the pulling of his strings threatened to entangle me in ways I hadn't yet imagined. Yet despite the intimidation, a stubborn spark of defiance burned within me. If Valeshire was a stage, then I was determined to unmask the truth, no matter the cost. As I turned to leave, my fingers brushed against the diary tucked safely in my bag, the silent testament to the secrets that had already begun to unravel. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but I knew one thing for certain: Victor Langley's influence was a force I could neither ignore nor underestimate. And in this town where no one showed their real face, the masks we wore were as dangerous as the truths they concealed. The night deepened, and with it, the game of shadows and deception intensified. I had stepped into the heart of Valeshire's darkness, and there was no turning back now. The question remained, could I survive the dance without losing myself? The answer, I suspected, lay hidden somewhere beneath the silver mask.